All right, welcome to the Sae Bae cast number 186 with Mod Husky. Mod Husky, how are we doing today?
Yeah, I'm very good, thanks. How are you doing?
Doing well. Very, very excited for this one. It's been over 3 years since I last had you on. That's wild to me because it doesn't feel like 3 years ago. It kind of just feels like maybe last year.
I feel like that's a sentiment I've shared just like working at Jagex. Like I still feel like I'm the new kid on the block, and then I realize I'm coming up to my 5 year anniversary, and it just kind of like, whoa, actually, I maybe I have been here longer than I think.
That is so crazy. 5 years almost. And yeah, because I still perceive you and Arcane and Elena, like you guys all seem very new to me still. But I'm like, okay, you kind you guys are kind of running the place. It feels like you guys have kind of taken over. I mean, you guys are the people that understand the game very well. You've been here for years now, and yeah, that's time flies.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a lot to talk about today. I have just been kind of, I don't know, ever since getting Mod Ash on again and having some other J mods on. I had Kieran on and Sarni just lately, and I've just really enjoyed getting the J mods on. They've always been just like fun casts. We dive into a lot of things that a lot of my audience, including myself, is just really curious of. So you've mainly been working on sailing behind the scenes. And just to start this conversation off, there's a great topic from Renegades asking, how are you enjoying working on sailing? Has it been fun working on such a large project?
Yeah, I think it's definitely been incredibly fun. I think like the thing with when you've been working on something for so long, it's definitely can be a mixed bag of emotions at times. I can definitely think back to moments that were frustrating, moments of happiness. It's definitely a more complex bag just for nature. It's such a long project, but I think it's been a fantastic opportunity to just get to work on such an important update. It's something that's like no one on our team has really done this before, right? We haven't released a new skill, and anyone who does have any experience would be like maybe like Ash remembers what it was like for you know RuneScape to release a new skill, which like we're just in a completely different environment now. The game is different, the community's different, the team's different. So yeah, it's been a great experience, and it's something that I guess I'm just like really excited to see where it goes. Like where we end up, what actually gets released, what players think when it gets released, that kind of stuff.
It's such a big project. I mentioned this when I talked to Ash last. Just this is probably the biggest project, at least how I'm seeing it. And I mean, to be fair, I wasn't playing around the years 2008 to 2014, but this seems to be the biggest project ever across the games because OSRS is such a big game at this point, and I mean, this is just massive because sailing isn't even a thing in RS3. So we have this brand new navigation, everything that's going on with sailing. It's just the biggest project ever, and it's hard to know like where it'll actually end up because it's just like there's no blueprint for it. You guys are just figuring it out with the community, and it's really cool to see. But man, I would argue this is probably the biggest project ever. So do you want to correct me on that? Like, how do you perceive it? I would argue this is the biggest.
It definitely is the biggest, and I think almost certainly the most complex. And I think complexity generally comes from dealing with the unknown. I'm sure dealing like when the team was making their first raid, Chambers of Xeric, that was quite a complex thing because you're trying to think like, well, what is a raid in our game and how do we do things? But then over time, obviously, they could draw back to previous experience. Say, okay, this worked, that worked, etc. With a new skill, we don't really have that to fall back on. Like we've released skilling updates throughout the years, obviously. So we can think back to like what did players like about this skilling activity compared to that skilling activity. But I mean, the truth is that when it comes to a new skill, it has the potential to touch like the very fabric of the game. Um, in quite a lot of ways. I mean, when we were like back during the refinement process before we even knew what skill we were working on. It's like you can find yourself like quite easily designing a skill that feels very safe, like, oh, it doesn't interact with anything else, it kind of just does its own thing. um, but we know that that's not necessarily a good thing either, because then it just feels like it's this standalone thing at the side. And the players definitely with the decision to eventually settle on sailing, like, I can't think of a more ambitious skill that touches more things in the game
Yeah.
than this. So yeah,
Yeah.
it definitely makes you think about every single possible outcome of every single possible decision you could make. Um, because yeah, it will change the game, and I mean, hopefully for the positive. I'm not going to be, spending. Well, I guess at this point, it's definitely been over a year of my life working on something that is a detriment to the game, right? So
That's the other question I had. I mean, I can only imagine. I'm not a developer, and I'm not, trying to create something from the ground up. But I can almost imagine something that's multi-year, like a multi-year project. You've already been working on it for over a year. That can almost certainly potentially lead to burnout from just the sheer amount of work and discussion amongst the team and trying to get all this resolved. And plus, on top of that, you can't just rely on your team. You also are developing a game that heavily relies on the community. So how have you worked around that potential burnout? Have you experienced any bit of it? Is this project longer than you guys had even anticipated? What's going on, like, personally, and I guess just the bits you want to share, and then, like, in the team, how's the energy behind this all?
yeah, I think burnout can happen. I definitely experienced it mostly during refinement. I think that process took a long time, because it started way back from just the generic question, should a new skill be added to Old School RuneScape? And that was something that none of the other skill proposals did as a benchmark to see, what is the actual interest. And you're thinking about, like, what skills would players like? What are the pros and cons? What different skills? What even, like, design space is there? And I guess, like, personally, what I found is when you're on, say, like a normal project, like a raid, there's this pretty good sort of like ebb and flow. I wouldn't say a raid, just any normal piece of content. Guardians of the Rift might be a better example because I worked on that more specifically, where you've got like a little bit of design and a little bit of prototype, and then you get into like the project planning and you start talking about scope and all the things it'll do, and there's this design phase of like what rewards will it have, designs for those rewards, putting it out there, and then it's just, okay, now we need to make it. And you start from like basically nothing, like this blank page of like this file that you just start writing script in and go from there. And then you've got all the play testing, balancing. You obviously like put blogs out and you get player feedback, and then you have meetings to talk about like feedback and do that. And it all just sort of wraps up neatly, I think, where you have this sort of head down moment, ramps up to the excitement for release, and then you go through that whole feedback process on the release, and trying to think about like, okay, well, what things do we want to change? What things can we change? Because I mean, that's another whole thing about content development. I think in our game is I can make a million decisions before launch and feel very hamstrung post launch, because now the game's out there with the players, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can't just change things so freely. So you go through all that process, but then it just sort of like creates this like flow of like, excitement at the start, a bit of a lull where you're just head down doing stuff, as I said, then excitement and launch. And then it's nice to sometimes just like go back to the start again, like, okay, now think about next designs, next project, what are you going to do? But the point I'm kind of driving towards is that, like, with refinement and design taking so long, it was design and then more design, and then months later and more design and more design, and trying to talk through things and talk to players and find out what they want, and then more design. It kind of just felt very repetitive. I can imagine it was quite like anyone who maybe has been struggling to write a book. You're writing your 10th design on something, trying to think about things, and so I suddenly felt like I was more of a writer than a developer in a way, right? Like, I wasn't getting my hands into code necessarily the same. It was a very different way of working. So yeah, I would definitely say there were moments of like burnout feeling there, where I found myself itching to just go reach out to teams like the TOA team, that, hey, have you got just like a small feature I can work on in code for you guys, because I just need a break from this. Which thankfully the team I'm working on has been like super supportive of that. It's just like, yeah, like, if you're not feeling work, is there something you can do to be productive? How can we help you get there? And we had all these learnings about like making sure that we still shake up your day to day, because I think a lot of that can go like under the scenes a little bit. So yeah, I think I definitely felt burnout. I can't fully speak for Elena. I think she did too a bit, but I mean, I can't speak more positively about the team just being more supportive. And when you're open and talking about the problems that you have working, I think if you work for a company that's just like, shut up, get your head down, keep working, that's not my problem, you need to solve it, I'd be like, why? Like, leave that company. That's definitely not the process I had here. People were just really, good about it. And I think I'm just excited now to be more into that development side of things. I can actually just like work through tickets and we've got all the designs that we sort of want for now. I'm sure there's more to come, right? But it just feels like I've got a bit more natural workflow right now. I'm not sure if that was the answer you
No,
wanted.
that's perfect. Yeah, that's cool to hear too. And I feel like the community gets that vibe as well. That Jagex is actually a very welcoming, wholesome place to work at. I think over the years we see that more and more with just the sheer number of J mods and the energy we see on the Q&As especially. It seems like you guys are all friends, even with the challenges of a bigger team and a lot of out of office work. It just seems like a great place. One of the questions kind of branching off of that is, do you struggle to like remove yourself from work when you're off hours? Like, do you still find yourself thinking about sailing and thinking about RuneScape and thinking about all these things? Are you ever able to just unplug entirely? And like, how has that been for you?
Some days are hit or miss on that, I'll say, right? Like, I'm I think I probably am one of the worst devs for this. And like, so for example, right, we put out the Polo blog very recently with the Guardians of the Rift changes, and those changes specifically were things that I had worked on, where I proposed a lot of those things. I'm just reading, like, is there YouTube comments? Is there another video? Is there another Discord? Like, this is mostly in my spare time as well. Like, trying to read through things, think about things. And sailing was absolutely the same. Like every single blog, every single poll. And then even more than that, we have like, there's various Discords. There's a sailing Discord. And whether, I'm talking to NDA players in there about stuff or reading comments they've wrote, or even just what the general like players in that channel have done. Like, even if I'm not talking and interacting, which I definitely do, I definitely find it hard to shut off from times. I mean, some days are better than others, right? If I haven't put out anything I'm looking for feedback on, it can be easier. But I think just my mind's just always racing for things I could do, things I want to do, writing notes down for stuff at work, which probably doesn't help with some of the burnout problems we've spoken about before. But I think that's probably the biggest reason why I find myself constantly drifting away from the game as a player. Just so I think like if I can get involved in another game in another way, it like helps to reset the brain a little bit. Because I think like even if I'm just like, I don't know, doing a TOA raid or like decided to chill for the evening and do some cooking, it's still like in front of me the game that I play every day, and you just find yourself thinking about it, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, I ask because I'm in the same boat where, I mean, I'm just thinking about RuneScape. All my feeds are RuneScape. They've been for the past years too. I mean, just every time I'm online, which is all the time now, is just RuneScape, RuneScape, RuneScape. So I imagine it's probably very similar for the J mods, including yourself.
It has to be similar as a content creator in a way, right? Like, even if you're playing the game, it's like, what can I make content out of? How do you stop, like, because it is a job for content creators as well, right? So how do you stop the game becoming like take the job taking the fun out of the game,
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of a tough battle, and I mean, it's very first world battle. It's not it's nothing too deep,
For
but
sure.
it's definitely, yeah. Like sometimes you just think like, man, I just everything is RuneScape. Everything is about content creation, and you just have to take some moments to unplug entirely, and it's a good reset. So,
I mean,
yeah, no, continue.
I absolutely try not to take for granted the privileged position I'm in,
Yeah.
right? To just be able to work on this game for a living. I find it funny how I get comments from real life friends who like, man, like he really doesn't. He talks about his work a lot, like even in his free time and stuff. And I'm not like boring them, like being that guy who's like, so I'm releasing this sailing skill and stuff. Like it's not quite like that, but I think more so just I talk so positively about my work, and then I realize that like for some of my friends, they just wanted to shut off from work, right? Because maybe they didn't enjoy it so much, or maybe it was a rough day for them. And like, I'm not saying I don't have rough days at work, but I think everybody does, but more to the point of that, like, yeah, I think you really are winning at life if you enjoy what you do for your work. Because I mean, that's like 8 to 9 hours of your day, 5 days a week, and if you spent like a large portion of your life not enjoying it, it's like I really hope you're making up for that in your non-work hours, right?
Yeah, that's a great
Maybe that's a
point.
bit philosophical.
No, you're totally right. So I know we were talking before this cast, and you were a bit hesitant on just getting super, super into sailing, simply because there is just so much going on behind the scenes, and you said potential worries of stoking the flames of the community. That's you don't want to get too deep into it because there's just so many steps and so many processes that are going behind the scenes and figuring out the design processes, and then the alphas and the betas that are going to be coming in. And so for those listening, we're not going to take an absolute deep dive into sailing, and I'm apologize for those that were just like, ooh, we want all the juicy details. But is there anything, Husky, that you would like to share that I don't know, has stood out to you about the whole project?
Um, I think as a whole, it's just a very difficult project, and anyone who's been uh, in the community will have seen that. You know, there are a lot of opinions about whether it's sailing, new skills in general, and for the most part, it's something where I really do just want to step back and trust my community managers to do their job and to advise what's best in how to communicate with players, especially for what can be sensitive topics. Um, but fundamentally, I think the team just really wants this to be the most awesome update it can be. We don't want to release something half baked. We have a lot of passionate people on there, and the sailing skill has a lot of big asks for in that regard. It's not just that it's a new skill. It's potentially one of the biggest new skills we could have chosen to do. So, um, yeah, I think it's I do have that thought sometimes, like when I say like we've chosen to do, I mean more so like we could have just not presented sailing as an option back in refinement.
Yep.
We could have really just said like, no, this is too big. Maybe we should pick a safer skill, and we've definitely had those conversations. So yeah, I think it's something that we were like, well, we feel like players are going to want it. Let's see what they think, and I think like that's just, yeah, I'm not going to say much more than that because I think it's hard to sort of go anywhere from there. But it's an ambitious project, and I'm going to give it 110%. Like that's all I would say to the players is if you're, you know, trust us, give us the chance, try out things, engage with things when we put it out there, and yeah, just really try and tell us how you feel, I suppose, when it comes to feedback, because I think that's been some of the challenges sometimes is we just get like players like I'm not going to get too I can't really get into it too much, but it is just like very much like it doesn't help to see a statement without like trying to explain the statement. I think that just goes with any sort of logical discussion, and
Yeah.
we really are trying to engage. We're really trying to understand players. We're really trying to make it the best it can be. So yeah, I'll probably talk more about it on like more official platforms when I can. And I'm really hoping that the open tech alpha goes really well for the players. That's something we've fully announced as something that we're going to do. No date yet, but we really do just want players to jump into that and let us know how the ship navigation and controls feel, with a bit of an early look as to some of the gameplay loops that are going to be involved in sailing. So yeah, jump in, give your feedback. Really, really do let us know, because I think that's something that's been like at the heart of any discussion we've had from sailing, even internally, is it doesn't matter what you think in theory from reading a design. The thing we've gone back and forth a lot internally is you don't know till you're playing it, right? You
Yep.
really don't know how it feels until it's in your hands and you're playing it. And that's something we've been, trying to really work through and make sure that it's in an awesome state. So yeah. Hopefully that's at least some of an answer to that question.
Perfect. Yeah, that's exactly what it sounds. And again, just reiterating the passion that I and the community sees, the sailing team in particular, like just the passion you guys are radiating from this whole project. It's a lot of work. It is incredibly ambitious, but I think the majority of the community, and probably not the outspoken ones, are pretty damn excited for what you guys have to show us. And the communities are obviously always going to be divided on things, but I think giving you guys a chance is the fair way to go about it. So looking forward to it. So there is a question here from Screet Monge. He's asking, are there any games you enjoy in your spare time? And when developing a piece of content, what other games or media do you take inspiration from?
Ooh, good question. I mean, the standard stock answer is you can take inspiration from everything. But I think it could be dangerous when, like, you say, I take inspiration from blah, because players will just go, oh, you're just going to make that game in Old School RuneScape. And it's like, well, game design's a bit more complex than that. Sometimes I'll look at a game and be like, oh, that user interface or that user experience is really good, or that opening game experience was really good, or maybe just the world building in general, how stories are told, environmental storytelling. I played a lot of Elden Ring when it came out. I haven't touched the DLC yet. I'm basically like middle of moving house and don't have good internet right now, so I'm like waiting for that to like properly be like moved in. So we'll be moving in about a month's time, and I'll be just itching to play that DLC and just sit down and just nerd it out. But I think they do environmental storytelling really well. Very interesting environments, and sort of like they just don't tell you, oh, there was a big battle here and this happened. It's just like you just piece it together from things, and I think that's really interesting. I think that's something I've tried to be pushing a lot in general when making content, is just creating little stories where I can, or ways to make the content just be a bit more than just what it was. For those who interacted with Guardians of the Rift and were lucky enough to pull something from an intricate pouch, that whole thing was just, there's this abyssal rift you're pulling loot out of. The abyssal rift is sure to have a bunch of random stuff that got lost in there. And then, I'm not going to get too into spoilers, but the content's been out for a while. But there's a story sort of told with the necklace that you get there, and I just think like little things like that can just add to pieces of content in meaningful ways that, I'm sure most players shrug it off and go, I don't care how much XP per hour is it, what rewards do I, how long to green log, and just don't care, But I think like stuff like that can really add to the gaming experience, and I think the biggest sort of takeaway that I've been sort of figuring out in gaming the more I play it is that, like, God, there's so many really good games out there that, like, why would I want to play like a 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10 average game when there's so many 9s and 10s? And it's really just trying to create those really memorable sort of like experiences, that are just like, in a weird sort of way, like, I've got a major tangent here, but like, even just looking at our quests in the game, right? How many quests in that quest list could you memorize? Like, could you just list off your head, right? There's probably a bunch of them that are just so average and meh that, like, yeah, it's a thing, but it didn't stand out, right? But like, Ratcatcher stands out, for better or for worse, right? And I'm not saying let's make a bunch of shit quests, right? But I think like taking risks and you can create memorable experiences by just taking risks and having a vision is kind of the big takeaway I've had from games, where if you can just like nail something and stick to it, that's better than creating like the most safe copy pasted like sort of thing. And that's kind of what I've sort of, I guess, gathered from playing a lot of games and just trying to see what they like, is I go, ooh, that took risks and this didn't quite hit, but like, damn, I'm going to remember that experience. But I guess specific games that I've been playing a lot. I mean, outside of Old School, I joined the World of Warcraft Classic bandwagon when it moved to Burning Crusade specifically, and I've kind of just stopped playing it now that it's finished Cataclysm. Now that it started Cataclysm, should I say? I basically stopped at the end of Wrath of the Lich King, and that's more from like I feel like I got what I wanted out of that experience, but I got very hardcore into a speedrunning guild for the majority of that experience, trying to push like good times in the world, and it was just a really cool experience for me, just getting to be a player properly again in an MMO space, because even now, like I'll go around and my name's like people know what my name is in game. It's not super well known, but it happens now and again, right? Where someone will go like, "Oh, hey, Husky," and I don't hate that at all, right? It's like nice. I try and just like give them a little wave or something, but it makes you start to think like I can't say things as publicly in game anymore because what if it goes on Reddit, like
Yeah.
and it's not that I'm like a toxic person or anything, but like there's something about just like playing a game, chilling out, and just telling someone to shut the fuck up, right? You know what I mean? And not worrying about like that. And it's like, oh, Mod Husky was rude to me, blah blah blah. And it's like, I think I got that a lot where I just got to be like in a guild, like to use the phrase like with the boys and just like be a player, and that was just such a cool experience. I mean,
Yeah.
and I mean, speedrunning as a whole was just incredibly fun. We were like, I was raiding like 3-4 times a week, with 3 clones of the same character, all near best in slot, just trying to push. And I was very fortunate to be in the position I was in the guild I was, because I was nowhere close to the best player there, but they were awesome. We had a big meetups. I'm not gonna say where, but somewhere in Europe, we had a big meetup for a weekend at someone's house, and there was all 25 of us there, and that was awesome. So,
Oh, damn.
so yeah, that I'll be doing that a lot, and then I think ever since like Wrath Lich King ended, I've kind of been dabbling here and there. I rejoined Monster Hunter World when that craze was going about and tried to complete the game. I've been playing a lot of Hearthstone Battlegrounds recently, which is like an auto battler in Hearthstone's client. So yeah, just kind of been going about. I'm definitely trying new releases. Oh, Baldur's Gate 3 came out. That was awesome. Like I'm a big Dungeons and Dragons fan, so that game was just that game was chef's kiss. Like I know that it was like a big gaming controversy thing when it was like, oh, like this is setting the standard for games across, but like I can't even describe just like how good the music was, the characters, the voices. The fact that I'll just go off and find something on my 3rd or 4th playthrough that I never experienced, and it's completely voice acted and mocapped to such like high quality. It's like, oh, it's just so good. Like I think like Act 1, Baldur's Gate specifically, is just like a perfect masterpiece of game design. Like I think like even from a studying perspective, any game designers just play through and do that. So yeah, I've been a lot all over the place. In quite a few different genres there, but yeah, lots of things I like to try and do in my spare time. But as I kind of mentioned, internet's kind of shady right now, so I think that's why I've been playing a lot of Hearthstone Battlegrounds, because at the very least, like it's not something that requires good ping or latency. It's just something I can just play.
That's cool. A lot of those games I haven't touched, but I have touched Elden Ring, and the coolest thing that I saw you guys implement, speaking, as the team as a whole, but that Soul Heredit fight is so smooth and awesome, and it gives off those Elden Ring vibes of timing and parrying. It's just phenomenal. I was so impressed with that fight. It's so fun too. It's not overly difficult. It's just something that's you're not going to get on your first try. It's going to take a few tries, and it's just a fun fight that's really different than most fights you encounter in RuneScape.
I completely agree. I play tested the fight a little bit. I haven't tried it on my own character, and I haven't beaten the boss actually, even internally. But mostly from like I'm sure it'd be very different if I'm watching a YouTube guide and going step by step and all the strategies and stuff. Because I've tested a few builds of things that have changed from launch and all this stuff. But I think the team did an amazing job with that fight specifically. And I do remember a very difficult moment, when we saw how Wooks completed the fight on day 2 or something. And it was like, I'm not sure if you saw, but he was like running like diagonals from basically butterflying him.
Yeah.
And the team was really just trying to figure out and have that discussion of, is this really cool emergent player behavior, say solo Alm, or is this something that we need to change? And I think those decisions can be really difficult because if you made that content as a designer, you can sometimes be very biased and say, no, that's not how I want it completed. Nerf it, change it, hotfix it, whatever, right? But I think while player reactions at the time were very, Jagex nerfed it, didn't want fun, blah, 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 because everyone was finding the fight really difficult. what you just said there, to me, proves that they made the right judgment call for their content, because I wasn't actively part of that um, decision making process, as it wasn't like content that I'd worked on. But from what you've described, and I know I've seen this from a lot of other players, the fight is incredibly fun once you get it. It's just such a good experience that I think that's a really hard judgment call to make, you know?
Yep.
Like, how is the dust going to settle for this? And I'm really glad they made the change they did, because I think it's made the content better as a whole. So in this case, I think they knew what they... I can only imagine that they just knew what they'd created. They had confidence in it, that it was an awesome, fun fight, because they'd, you know, done a lot of play testing and knew what it felt like to do it well. So yeah, I 10 out of 10. Like, amazing piece of amazing boss fight. I'm not gonna say Colosseum is an amazing piece of content, not because I don't think it is, but because I guess I would want to play it first to fully form that opinion.
Yeah, you're right about that fine line between, I mean, the developer, generally speaking, like have spent so much more time on this piece of content, and when you're seeing it and you see something that isn't intentional, I always just think of the Akka butterfly method, and I can't even, like, I don't know what was happening behind the scenes when you're just able to skip the entire fight by just running in these diamond patterns. But I don't know if there was as much confidence in just how fun the normal fight is, you know, trying to just obey all the mechanics that were intended. That seemed like a great decision, though, to keep Akka Butterfly, because it isn't just this constant diagonal pattern. It takes a lot of timing, and ultimately, I think it's actually a smoother experience that just feels like you can manipulate the boss in a fun, dynamic way where it's easy to still make a mistake. It's not just you're going easy mode on it.
Yeah, and I definitely think the Akka experience is very different from the Sol Herodit one, because I saw that, I know I'm diving into this, and I'm not an expert on this. I really want to preface it as this is my opinion. I didn't work on the content, and I'm only assuming, and all this, like, blah, blah, blah. I'll put the walls up first. But in general, I think that it would feel very different if Akka was the final boss of TOA and you could butterfly. I think that is a very different experience than one of the mini bosses, fundamentally.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think, like, butterflying doesn't completely trivialize Akka at all, right? Like,
Not at
especially
all,
if you've got
yeah.
all invocations on and you're doing double special attacks, and you need to learn how to do the memory timing with that, and also be cognizant of, is this a 4 pattern, a 5 pattern, a 6 pattern? And I still think, like, I'm not a super expert on TOA. I only started trying to get into it, dabble it, but I'm fairly certain that even if you perfect butterfly, he will still change style eventually.
Yeah.
If you've got enough invocations on. So it's not like it solves it, and he's still got a final phase. So it's like, it's nowhere along the lines of just like, do this one thing for the entire fight, and it does it. Like, there's even a skill to like transitioning to another quadrant and continuing the butterfly, right? So I think like Akka has ended up in a good place, because the fight is just way more than that. But I can only speculate as to where metas would have settled. But I think that butterfly at Sol Herodit might have been just the go-to way for everyone's first quiver, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously, it was never efficient. Like, I think you absolutely kill it quicker if you do it properly. But, like, I think that cheapens the experience completely.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a good call. And, yeah, that's just it's nuanced. Everything in this game is pretty nuanced, and you gotta try to... It's cool, though, because you guys have... you have so much experience with these types of things where you're because PVM content specifically becomes so much more enjoyable when it feels like the player discovered something and can manipulate the boss in a really fun way, and that cannot be trivialized. You can't just remove things like that just to fit what you want. Even something like Red X Baba, which, you know, arguably makes the fight pretty, you know, stale if you're looking at it just from a broad perspective. If you're looking at it from like a viewer's perspective, you know, are you gonna have all the monkeys spawning and these boulders flying, or are you just gonna walk under it repeatedly and stuff? But ultimately, how does it feel in the player's hands? And sometimes just manipulating a boss and making it like your little bitch feels good. And that's something that's just kind of like a tough balance to get right. But I think, again, the team really knows what they're doing at this point and can make that judgment call pretty accurately now.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think that like it's sometimes like I think there's two things. First of all is like don't be scared to listen to the community. And the community really do push like if the community really feels strongly about something, they won't let it drop and they will let you know, which is like such a cool thing to see. But I do think as well, like even in the community, like again, if I'm not mistaken, like it's quite divisive even in the community where some people are like, keep it, it's good, it's skill expression, others saying delete it, you know?
Yep. Yep.
And that's like that makes it really hard for us sometimes to know what's correct. I think there's definitely learnings there for like I think like how would I put this? Like we tried an invocation system with TOA and we obviously like set up a bunch of rules for how invocations work, but I think there's a lot of learnings there for future content. And I think the biggest one is that like if you have some way to like it's not quite infinite scaling, but like for the all intents and purposes, like you're getting pretty close to player limits with max invocations on. I don't even know off the top of my head if it's been done with all of them, but I'm fairly certain if it wasn't done with all of them, it was pretty damn close with like Port Khazard and stuff. I can't remember what the actual record is. But to the point where you could almost say, for all intents and purposes, it's close to infinitely scaled, right? Because there's no point getting higher. Yeah. And our combat system really does get pushed and stretched to the limits when that's the case. You know, if bosses get so accurate and their damage is increasing that players just kind of can't deal with that damage, they're gonna find other methods. If defense gets so high that fights get dragged on, and again, you just have no choice but to take damage, players will find other methods, right? Mm-hmm. I think if I was looking to steal from an invocation like system in the future, I would probably have suggested that we cap how much the stats increase for the boss, at least on like defense and offensive stats. I think HP is probably fine to scale, maybe. But like that's just kind of where my thoughts are at. I don't know if that's like I wouldn't say no if that's like a shared team conclusion, but that's just something like my own thoughts looking at this is trying to see like not whether or not like Red X is good for the game and whether it should be there or whether that's a good strategy, but just kind of trying to see like why is this meta come across the way it has, you know? So yeah, I think that's just general thoughts on that. But I agree, it's like it's a hard thing to know if you're right, and it's also something that can change like quite heavily with time, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Players can feel really strongly about something on launch of a piece of content. They can feel very differently a year later. They can feel even differently from that to 5 years later, right? I mean, we've seen that even with Chambers of Zarek. That's the longest standing piece of raid content, and there's changes that we've made to that players would have said, no way in hell should you add an axe to the Mutadal rune. Like, yeah. Even a year or two in, right? Like, players were like, no, like, that's an inventory spot. That's part of the skill expression to be able to, you know, have another inventory slot. But, like, it's just so hard, right? You have to constantly, like, reevaluate, listen to the players, and then try and weigh up, like, is this, like, a genuine, like, piece of feedback and something we should look at? Or is this, you know, is this just like I guess like a flavor of the month thing? Do you know what I mean? Where sometimes there's like something that sparks up, and a lot of players talk about it, and then like everyone forgets it. You know, it's just not a big thing.
Yep. Yeah, there's the trends of the community over the years just fascinate me because yeah, in the early days, everything was about making like it was so important to keep grinds tedious. That was what was seen as the difficulty expression, and you know that like we have to keep things clunky and difficult and kind of gatekeepy a little bit. I mean, I think tick manipulation in general, those kinds of I don't know, just the trends have moved on so much though, and one of the fears of some of those more quote unquote purist players is the easy scapification of this game. And just we're heading down a path similar to what they remember, RS3 going down, where everything just becomes very simple. Everything becomes a lot more, in a good way, in my opinion, more, what's the word I'm thinking of? Just easy to navigate and more simple and less clunky. And do you have any thoughts on these trends? Do you worry occasionally about the overall community sentiment on trying to remove these tedious parts of the game? Do you want to see the game kind of maintain its old school feel where things are just a little bit, clunky? Or are you kind of happy with how the community is navigating this whole Easy-Scape situation that it feels like we've been in for years now?
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic of conversation, and it's something that, we've definitely talked about internally. And I think the biggest thing is that it's incredibly inconsistent as well. I think like what you'll find is like an individual's player perception of a grind will change based or not whether they were lucky or unlucky at it. The grind is completely fine if I was lucky or average, but it was terrible if I was dry. So now I'm petitioning for changes because, I'm dry and it's horrible. But that also like is a reflection of how the content ages as far as like time invested into it. You could like your first 2 days of doing a piece of content, you could be thinking this is the best content in the world, but it's really got sort of dry and stale, at hour 50, at hour 100, etc. And I think that's something where like very few players maybe even experience what the extreme ends of that are going. I mean, if you look at drop rates, we have an RNG based game. We are literally like dictated by what are maths and statistics in a way. Someone will go 10 times dry for a drop in a place from time to time. It's very unlikely, but it will happen. And players have gone even rarer than 10x. So it's like, obviously, like very recently we saw that whole trends of like asking for like drop rate protection and stuff and all this stuff. And it's a very complicated thing. And there might not be perfect solutions either because there's like economy and all these things to consider. But I've always personally thought that like one of the fun things about like our game as a whole is just that like I think like it how would I put it? It's like I think the longevity is part of the game, but I think it can be really bad when it's done to extremes, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Like it's a very long form game where like even just going back to the original Gower's philosophy where they didn't think that 99 was like a realistic thing to aim for. We're just gonna make the XP so high and people will always be able to make progress. I think that kind of like I think it's always important that you have another grind in a way. Do you know if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, that this is what this game is built on. It's like it's endless goals. I totally agree.
So I think that's an important aspect. But as far as like trends towards Easy-Scape, it's like I think my personal opinion is always it gets very dangerous if it's sort of like players ask for this and your response is sure, why not? And I've always kind of been of the opinion that it shouldn't be just sure, why not, as like I guess we'll do it because I can't see a reason why not to. I would really push for us to be doing the most important and biggest impactful changes where we're instead challenging them to go, sure, but tell me why. Do you know what I mean? Sure, here's a good reason to do it, right? And make it like a great thing to be doing. It's kind of that like feeling of don't do like 100 meh things that like could have been left either way, but maybe like doing 15 great or amazing things just has a bigger impact to the actual players, and just for the health of the game as well. Because I think that like I've seen the sentiment among high level players, especially, or like players who do commit themselves to completing a lot of content. It's just like, well, content gets easier over time, so the best thing to do is to not play the game. And I think it's like a bit tongue in cheek in a way, when it's like, of course, like you should just invest time in the game because you're always making progress. You're not making negative progress, but I think there's an element of truth to that. And, players will bring up the the train track meme, you know, when it's like, oh, it should be bad because I did it, and it's like, well, it's actually just way more complicated than that, you know.
Yeah.
I think that like a biggest example would be like, oh, like more and more content is getting really good with a T-bow or a shadow or something. So let's just like 10x the drop rate so everyone has them, and then you've lost the idea of what a mega rare is, right? I think for me personally, an MMO has always been about flexing the achievements that you've earned. And sometimes that means that like you went out and did something that other people looked at and went, nah, man, that crosses the line for me. And then you look at someone and go, damn, that's actually pretty impressive that you did that. And we probably just need a good mix of achievements as hell. There need to be a lot of things that are attainable, some things that are a bit more out of reach, some things where it feels impactful that you go lucky, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think like that's kind of harkening back to what I talked about earlier when I was like, you need to create that diversity of experiences. Like I couldn't remember anything about my Cerberus grind in my Ironman because I think I got most like all 3 of the boots in like 3 or 4 tasks, like roughly on rate, but didn't really think about it. But by hell do I remember that I got my bludgeon on like, was it like 1362 KC or something around that? Because like it was just such an experience at Sire, right? And it's not like I'm sitting here being like, oh, like there should be dry protection, and you know, I've gone through the thoughts as a player: is my account bugged? Have I done something wrong? Did they turn off some of the drops on my account because it just doesn't feel likely? I mean, like I swear like right now my account's like 1600 Sire and has like 6 unsired or 7 unsired. It's like actually atrocious. But like those are the experiences where like I had that experience and I had the 26 KC bow. Like I can't really like complain about that either. So
those are the perks of being a JMod, right? Just turn on the little RNG switch real quick before leaving the office.
Hey, I had 2 T-bows on my Ironman before I became a JMod, so I can't really say much. Like I got one at one at 26 and one at 56 or something. It was actually stupid. Oh my god. Honestly, like if you want to see a T-bow, do a raid with me because I just see them. Like I just get them. You'll never get a T-bow from me, but you will see the drop. Because like in what was it, in the recent league, like I think I had 40 purples and 7 or 8 of them were T-bows.
Jesus, man.
Like I don't know. Like I just apparently am a magnet for T-bows. But like I think that's part of the fun when like you can have those experiences in your games. I've gone on a bit of a ramble, a tangent. Like I'm sure someone's gonna reply in comments and be like, "Oh, so Mod Husky endorses that, you know, it's okay for an Ironman to get his Blade of Sildor at 3000 KC, right?
Yeah.
That's good for the game." But it's like, I think the thing I worry about is that like if you create like this super fair system across the board, it's not special anymore. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like not. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right, and I'm glad you brought up the CG example. I think that's what really hits home for me is when I'm streaming and some more casual player pops into the stream and says, "Hey man, I'm really struggling. I just hit 1900 CG. I've been at this place for 18 months. I can't get my BOFA and progress with my account. Do I just de-iron at this point? Like I just hate this." He can only play, you know, he says like, you know, 8 hours a week or something. And just like, I am so sorry. Like that actually sounds incredibly miserable. And you see that occasionally of just these kind of pinnacle pieces of content that are very impactful to one's account, especially on Ironman mode. And again, this kind of comes back to the argument, and you hear it a lot of the time is, well, don't play an Ironman if you don't want to experience this absolute suffering that is inevitable in some situations. Maybe don't play an Ironman and just be able to freely get the gear you want and play a main account, and that's kind of what you're signing up for. But I totally am empathetic with the more casual players that, you know, want to make progress on their account but just don't have the time to, and these insane grinds that people just get completely unlucky on is pretty dreadful. So I'm totally empathetic to that conversation of anti-dry mechanics and maybe potential solutions to it. I'm not completely dogmatic on how Old School has been and should be always, that, you know, things can go really, really bad, but things can go really, really good. Personally, I enjoy it. I'm one of the very odd players that just has a ton of time to put into this game. But it is a pretty deep question at this point, especially as the player base continues to get older. And also one thing that I've kind of failed to touch on is just the sheer amount of content now. I mean, it's not like we're just playing a game with DKs, God Wars, and KBD and KQ. I mean, it's just, we have so many places, and now there's this overall feeling of collection logging, and so people really feel like they want to get the number up, and there's more and more and more content coming out every single year. And it's just, wow, okay, what are we going to do? In my head, I think, what are we going to do about drop rates going forward? Can we kind of tone back, make everything a little bit more reasonable to obtain simply because of the sheer amount of stuff to go for? Or, yeah, I don't know. It's a huge topic. I don't know if you have anything more to add on what I just said.
I think like that's the nail on the head, right? It's a huge topic. If there was a clean solution, we'd probably have implemented a clean solution, right? It's something that is very polarizing in the community. It's something where it's like, it's just something that's just like, if you fix this, you probably have knock-on effects on other things. I wouldn't say like we're completely like unempathetic to it, though. I mean, even just with a recent update with TDs, right? Players like said, "Oh, it's stupid. It drops one bone claw at a time." Like, and it's like, well, that's kind of the idea. It's like the visible vestiges, right, from DT2, where we're kind of saying having to hit something at half the drop rate twice is way more likely to prevent dry streaks. You know?
Yeah.
And it's us trying to experiment with that kind of thing. I also think that like some of the stuff like guaranteed purples can be really like, I've seen this like a thing, or like guaranteed like next drop. Like imagine it's like, okay, I'm always gonna get all is it 8 or 9 of the drops from TOA in succession. So you know your next one's gonna be a shadow and stuff. And then like I know it's like, cool, well this is just mains only. But you run into problems where it's like people want to be like, people are more likely to raid with you because they know you're due a shadow kind of and want to split.
Yep.
And you end up with all these weird things. Or it's like, maybe it's the opposite, right? Maybe I know my next 2 purples are going to be Light Bearer, Fang, and maybe a Lindis Ward. Like, you know the next 3 are guaranteed. So like, it's just never worth doing that piece of content because you know you need to hit 3 bad drops before you can see a shadow again, right?
Yeah.
It definitely gets like so messy so quickly. So yeah, I mean, we're trying to experiment with some things. I think like some bad luck protection, like I think like Perilous Moons is quite harmless, where it just kind of says like, you'll get like at least the set in order. Or like you can't get duplicates of the same set, I think it is, or maybe I can't remember exactly how that works. I think that stuff can be harmless, especially when it's like a smaller piece of content. But yeah, I will say like, God, this is controversial. I am less empathetic to Iron players, and that sounds stupid, right? That sounds like, but they're the ones
Totally
who deserve
fair.
the most empathy, right? But I actually think I have this theory. It's like a personal theory, right? That there's 2 camps of Iron players, and I think people can start from one and move to the other. And it's something where like, so I'm the kind of Ironman who loves fishing, getting their own food. Like I enjoy farm runs and the collecting my massive stack of potions, and you know I'm going to use them where I think it's best, and I'm going to ration my supplies and consider like using a downgrade to a piece of content because, you know, like blood runes are valuable. Why would I use a Sang? I'm just going to use a Toxic Trident at Zulrah and stuff like this, right? And I think I think that's how a lot of Iron players start off, right? It's very like, oh, it's self-sufficient, I'm gathering all my stuff. And I think that what tends to happen is you've got this other camp of Iron players who I think kind of just want to play collection log mains. Like, they just want to get all the drops for themselves before they use it. And then, like that's the game mode they want to play. So for some of these players, especially like if you're a maxed Iron Man, I think some Iron Men will like start off being, yeah, I like it self-sufficient, but like are at the point where, especially if they've been a maxed Iron Man for a long time, it's like, I'm like, you know, 120 mil farming and 80 mil herblore, and I've already done this, I've already proven it, I got the 99, just let me get as many supplies as I want so I can just PVM, right?
Yeah.
And I think like either it's two different players who just have different goals, like just the PVM focused Iron Man who doesn't care about want to care about supplies anymore, or maybe they started off as one and they moved to the other. But I think like I've definitely seen like this in like different camps of like Iron players, and I think that yeah, so like to like someone who's like saying, "Oh, I need a Bofa to progress in my account as an Iron player," my response would probably be as a fellow Iron, you kind of don't. You kind of don't need a Bofa, you know, like there are other options out there. It's just that I think a lot of players get focused on like efficiency and like go, well, Bofa is actually the most efficient option for me. Like before I start Bandos, I'm gonna get my Bofa and I'm gonna like 7-0 him around the room or whatever the actual number
Yep.
is, right? Um, because that's the most efficient way. But like Iron Man for years were just like gonna go get a Dragon Warhammer and use a tent whip, and it's fine, it works, it's not efficient, but like as far as an Iron account, I think the way you need to look at it is just say that you're never going to complete all your goals in an Iron account, not unless you are willing to play it as a job. So to me, it's just like just make the progress that you can. If you're getting dry, if Corrupted Gauntlet is bringing you down and you're getting dry, maybe hit up some shamans for a hammer for a bit for a few days. Take a break. Maybe just go do Bandos like and like completely just like with a whip in your Barrows gear and just get a few kills and maybe you'll spoon something. It doesn't feel efficient, but like like I think that's the thing about our game is that like players get so hung up on the efficiency and the metas that like they feel forced to do something when you kind of don't have to. But maybe that's just my own personal take. It really is like I know that that's not a sentiment that's shared across everyone on the team. I know that's not a sentiment that's shared across every player, but like I don't know. I at least started playing Iron Man because I wanted the challenge,
Yeah.
right?
No, you're
And
like nailed right on the head. I mean, this is also a culture thing. I think the people I'm talking to, I mean, because I don't even know how people feel that aren't interacting on streams or Reddit. They're just playing their Iron Man, probably having a great time. I'm hearing the people that it seems as though these players that come and just are having a really rough time and they tell me all about it, they see the game as I'm not having fun until I hit this, until I am in this guy's camp. Like the person I envy, like his account I envy so much, and I feel like as soon as I get to his point, then I'm going to start enjoying the game rather than just not comparing yourself, which is the way healthier way to go about it, and just enjoying the game for what it is. Just because I think I was in that mindset a little bit. I don't think I ever struggled with it too much because I was kind of an earlier on Iron Man that progressed, before the big, huge surge of Iron Man, it seemed like. But I didn't try to compare myself to other people's accounts because it would just drown you. I mean, there's just so many hours you need to put into the game. You just have to see where you're at. And there's always going to be players at your level, and you can kind of you can compare status with your echelon of players. And I think for Iron Man, at least, that's the healthier way. The healthier approach is to not compare yourself and to not think, I can't enjoy the game until I hit this guy's crazy status of Iron Man. And I actually think the team's done a great job with introducing mid-game stuff. I know I'm surrounded by a lot of high-level players that whenever there's a new update that comes out with things that are not best in slot, they're just like, what the hell is this? I'm guilty of that as well. But it really is important to have a huge variety of gear and weapons just to have a very diverse arsenal where, okay, if Bofa's not working out with you or working out for you, you can at least have something that's very, very close to it. And it's a different type of weapon. I think Moons of Peril was just a brilliant update to come out because it's just brand new gear that's fun and powerful, but not too extreme. Me killing Duke at the moment, I'm using a scythe, best in slot stuff, and it's so much more powerful than, a zombie axe or I would even consider a Soul Reaper axe kind of a mega rare at this point. But if you don't have that, it just feels crappy. And I don't think it would be wrong to just have mega rares be a slight upgrade over everything else rather than these huge disparities between them. That's my thoughts on it, at least.
I mean, I think it creates at least meaningful gaps for us to fill. I mean, like, I don't know if you've tried it with Emberlight, but like that's a thing
That
now,
was a
right?
nice, yeah, that's a nice upgrade. I think that was great.
So I think I obviously like I don't want to jump too much into TDs. I know some of the community sentiment around drops and rarity. It's like, I guess, like, before I jump into that, it's like, it's really hard when you're on a long-term project to be aware of everything the team's doing, right? If I was aware of everything the team was doing and every minor design decision, I wouldn't get anything done, right? Like, I just wouldn't. You've got to sort of pick your battles and what you can. There are some projects I contribute more to, because I have to try and limit myself. There's others I don't, but like, I know there's some sentiment at drop tables. I browsed Reddit and stuff, but ignoring all that aside, like, just the niche they fill for some like content to be closer to mega rares, I think is a pretty good one. And I do think that the Shadow has kind of had this own problem where, like, T-Bow came out and it wasn't miles ahead of Blowpipe, at least in terms of if the stats of the creature were correct, right?
True.
Scythe comes out and we had a lot of good options, for melee still. Like, obviously Scythe was still better, but Magic has always been in kind of this dog position. If I'm being honest, it's always been kind of terrible. So, but just the idea that you come out with a Magic mega rare kind of just means that, like, you're kind of comparing this mega rare to how good a Scythe and a T-Bow is, because that's the established baseline. I can only imagine, right? Like, this is the thought process. So you kind of need, like, if it's like significantly worse than those things, but like, because nothing else in Magic was ever close to touching those either, you've just created a bigger gap. And I think that the way the Shadow obviously works with, like, multiplying stats on gear, it kind of becomes its own beast, if you know what I mean, to handle. So
yeah, it's funny.
I think it.
Yeah, no, continue.
I'd say, at least I hope it provides us room to, like, bridge that gap a bit, because I do think you're right in a way that, like, it's very easy to choose alternatives to Scythe if you don't have a Scythe. It's much harder to choose alternatives to Shadow.
Yeah. Yeah, when I hear of people's just struggles killing Whisperer with Ivan's Blast or a Trident, and I'm like, yeah, when you upgrade to Max Mage with a Shadow, which I think that was the intention with the Shadow, is it's niche because the T-Bow has its niche, the Scythe has its niche with big monsters. The Shadow's supposed niche was supposed to be, well, you can only really use it if you have Max Mage, because that's what's going to make it powerful. So you can't just spoon Shadow and you just have Mystics. It's not going to perform as well. But ultimately, with endgame players, they do have a Max Mage set, and it just outperforms everything by a mile. But, I want to get your thoughts on this. I was talking, I can't remember with who exactly, but it was the idea of mega rares being the more challenging weapons to use, where right now, all three mega rares, at least the ones we recognize, not Elder Maul or the Kodai or anything, but they are all 5-tick weapons, and they're actually easier to use than their lower counterparts, which are 4-tick. The faster the weapons are, usually the harder they are to control and to not lose ticks with. Do you feel like it would be appropriate going forward to actually have the mega rares be the more difficult weapon to use? So speeding up, maybe adding some variables. I know the Heka of Tumakin, I think that's what it was going to be called, was gonna be like this pretty difficult weapon to use. I think it got way too convoluted. I think most people can agree with that. But at least it was going to be a 2-tick firing wand that also had this 4-tick little variable here and there. And it was going to be very difficult to not lose ticks with, and to discover, at least with Solo Olm, how to navigate that properly. Do you think that's a healthy way to go about potential new mega rares coming out to raids and other pieces of content, is to make them actually more difficult to use, but have their power be appropriate to, if you're not losing ticks, this actually will be best in slot DPS?
I mean, I was going to ask if you'd heard of the Heka, or if you remember it when you started talking about it, because I think I can see that thought process perhaps being a motivation for it, or at the very least, I can see the thought process of, can we create something more interesting than a 5-tick big damage 2-hand weapon, which obviously, like, it ran into its own problems. Biggest one, I think, was just complexity, right? If something is hard to use, it's probably got an increased amount of complexity, I guess, or at the very least mechanical skill. Like, because there's definitely a difference between, like, something that's easy to use on the surface, but has a lot of hidden complexity the more you learn about it, or something that's just from the get-go, like, this has so many effects, which I think was kind of what the Heka did. It was like on this spellbook it does that, on this spellbook it does this other thing, and there's like four different niches it's hitting at once. So one of them's a heal that has a different range, then this other one has a longer range, and it suddenly feels like you're designing 4 weapons at once. I can imagine.
Yeah.
Where like maybe there is room for something that's more complex, but not feeling like 4 weapons, but. Yeah, I don't know. I guess like part of it comes down to like what the community wants, and I don't want that to be like a throwaway, like, oh, he's not answering the question. It's just what the community wants. I think in truth, right, like there was a precedent set by what a mega rare was and what players expected, and I think sometimes if you try to get too creative or too in a niche or too complex, it just becomes like, okay, I just want the stack the damage increase, and from the players as well. I'm not sure if you remember the sentiment at the time, but they were basically saying like, why does Magic get this really weird, complex weapon when like it's so far behind melee and range?
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
So like it needs this power spike. Why are you trying to fill a niche when it needs a power spike? And I mean, by God, it got a power spike, right?
Yeah. No,
So,
it was overall a good thing, I think, to release a shadow. Plus my OCD, it soothed it, knowing that okay, we now have all 3 styles. They're all 5-tick. They're all beasts. So.
yeah. And I think like regardless when it comes to mega rare design, as much as you want to put like mechanics of the game and come up with a cool design and all this stuff, like I think the first thing a mega rare needs is like this conditional is it needs to be expensive, right?
Yeah.
And that's not just rarity, that's also like supply, right? Like, and the idea of owning the 3 mega rares, like that's a goal a lot of accounts set themselves to, whether they're iron or main, is I want to own all 3, right? So I think like if it's just this, they've created this weapon as a mega rare from a raid, and it's only really usable at these 2 bosses, it kind of feels bad. And we saw that with the Scythe, right? Like that was one of the biggest feedback things with the Scythe around about equipment, or was it Project Rebalance? I think it was called the second time around, where it was like the problem with the Scythe is it was used at like 4 or 5 places, but at those places it was barely better. So it's a difficult one. I think the Scythe didn't help. It was also very expensive to use.
Yeah.
Like as an upkeep cost compared to everything else, especially the T-bow. But no, it's a complicated topic. I don't think I can say like, yes, I want it to be more complex. But I also get where you're coming from, where
Yeah,
an amount of skill to use an item is like a cool thing.
it wasn't necessarily. I think I brought up the Heka. My actual feelings on it are not really to add anything more complex. It's mainly just to speed up the weapons. So like a new melee mega rare, if it was a 2-tick attacking thing that actually on paper is better than a Scythe marginally, but in order to access its power, you need to not lose any ticks, because as soon as you lose 1 tick, boom, there's 50% of your power gone. It's something where just a simple 2-tick melee weapon as a mega rare that costs 2 bill would be so much more interesting, just because it's a faster attacking weapon, and to actually use it properly does take legitimate skill, rather than just sitting there waiting every 5 ticks and just taking a huge chunk out of the monster's health. It would just take a lot more. I even imagine something like Nex, where you are doing a hybrid switch and switching in between range and melee. If you're trying to use these new, let's just say like a 2-tick stabby boy, and you're trying to get all your DPS in at Nex, it's going to be much harder to maintain that high DPS that actually is theoretically better than everything else, while trying to do like a full range switch. And I think that alone, without adding any more complexity to the weapon, is just more in line, I guess, with how I see a mega rare, or how I see mega rares going forward, at least. Just more difficult to use simply because of the speed at which they attack.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. I mean, faster weapons generally require more skill, and I think you definitely feel that with a blowpipe, especially because of like the shorter range, especially, is something you need to play around. Whereas a T-bows just kind of stand anywhere, and as long as you can see it, you can probably shoot it, right?
Yep.
So I get where you're coming from. The truth is, I don't have an answer to you, because I probably haven't thought about it a ton, is the truth. But I do think that I wonder if the complexity needs to be on the weapon, as opposed to just having the mechanics of the boss that suit it. Like the poster child for that is obviously Solo Arm, right? Where it's because it says like you need to move to this place within 4 ticks, and you get an attack off, and you don't want to lose attacks, and how that lines up with his attack pattern. I think that can create for fun stuff, but at the same time, you can't just rely on that all the time because you can't have solo alms everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I've said this time and time again. I think our game needs more Krakens. As much as like,
yeah, I agree, man. Like, bring it back. We gotta take a few steps back and go back to KVDs and stuff. I love that.
I think there's an intimate part of Old School RuneScape strategy that players forgot about, where sometimes it's just picking the gear, right?
Yep.
I know like Abyss list will have it, or like there'll be discords. Here's the gear setup for this boss, but like Kraken was cool. It just kind of said like, yeah, your magic accuracy doesn't matter, but your magic defense really does. So then you see people like, at least like before the days of people just camping full ancestral and a sang and out healing everything, right? Like,
Yeah.
you saw a lot of people going there with like Armadillo gear and carols, and that was like a really cool thing. But I think there's definitely space for bosses that are just like sit back, chill, borderline AFK. Like you can kind of AFK KBD, right? You just need to make sure you've got your potions up in time. You look at your screen every now and then and heal.
Yep.
I don't know. I feel like more Krakens would be good. Not because like I don't want complex content. I think there's room for both though, and I think that I've definitely found that as my account progressed, I found less and less laid back chill goals and only intense goals left, which kind of makes me say like if I don't want to sit down and do something more intense, I guess I don't play this game.
You're totally right. I'm actually so glad you brought that up because I feel like I'm crazy when I ask for things like that. I don't often bring it up just because it feels like a lot of the community is like, no. Like you cannot at this point in 2024 come out with Kraken. You just can't. It's just like it's against the game philosophy at this point. I'm like, why? Those are genuinely something like KBD is, first of all, it has nostalgia to it. But on top of that, it's just you head-to-head with a dragon. And there's tiny little ways to make it more efficient. If you're using a 5-tick weapon, you can do the step unders every 5 ticks. And it's just little ways you can kind of manipulate it. We see it with KQ as well. KQ is a really interesting fight. It's just a tank fest at the end of the day. But I think KQ is a little bit more annoying just because you take so much damage. There's really no way to get around it. But it keeps it kind of interesting because there are ways to mitigate that damage in interesting ways that are just purely just normal mechanics, like stepping under and when you're not attacking. But KBD I think is a great example of just a head-to-head fight. It's chill. You almost want to go dry on KBD in a way because it's just such a chill grind. You don't need to do much. You just look at your PC, click the boss, and you're good. I think honestly, I think if you guys were to come out with a boss like that, just with just one fun unique that comes from it, and it's just a really, really chill boss, I think actually a lot of players would be really happy with it.
Yeah, I think I know the answer to why we don't, right? Like, if I'm honest, like this might just be like guessing. I don't know. Is that like you saw the Araxor blog?
Mm-hmm.
And players, new Slayer boss, cool. It's got, it's got a new BIS item, and it's got a very meaningful reward, and I'm sure it's going to be like this like intricate fight and stuff because like I expect this from a high level Slayer boss. But like we don't get a lot of just like bossing content as a whole. Imagine if that Araxor blog had instead been, hey, like here's Kraken's sister, and you need to have strong melee defense gear, and you're going to attack it with ranged at the same time. And it's going to drop, I don't know, some random side grade that the community is going to complain is purely for Iron players and nobody else. And then you suddenly just get this point, cool, like, I don't care, this sounds really boring. Give me something more fun, Jagex. I pay money, I want, something more fun. So the truth is that, like, maybe these kind of pieces of content either need to come out as a big bundle, so it feels more appealing because there's more of them, or it needs to come out as part of another project. But you could almost make the argument that, like, okay, like, is this the most important thing we could add to a piece of content? Like, does like adding like a KBD add a lot of value to Varlamore? And it's like, well, not really. It's just a thing it's kind of hot. You get what I mean, right? You can always think of something more important to do.
You're right.
But I don't know. Like, I kind of feel like there's a space for it. I don't know. I was really sad when I got my Kraken pet. Not because I hate my pet, but because I was stunned with Kraken, right? And I was just like, God, that was such a chill piece of content that I enjoyed.
You know,
part of me...
I just want to like butt in and I think the best way to go about it, actually, now that you were saying that, is you can't just add a KBD where you can freely kill it. I think what you need to do is actually make it Kraken, where this is task only. So you get a task and it has the Slayer boss that is just unbelievably chill. And it's a reward for doing Slayer. And so now you have a boss. It doesn't even need to drop anything crazy, just a cool pet and generous loot. That's super easy. It's got a high Slayer level requirement, but it's just unbelievably chill, like kind of just like disgustingly chill. I think that's how you have to go about it. A very high Slayer level requirement. I'm not saying Araxer is going to be this, but if you were to come out with another Slayer boss that's actually just Kraken 2.0 at this point, and it just has a very generous loot table, but it's task only, and you only get a few of them, maybe like 50 or something. I don't know how it would go, but something where it's like, oh, the juice task, basically. I've been waiting for this. Like, that's when something feels really good, I think.
Yeah, I think you could be right there. I think especially like the reward might not necessarily be the fight, but like the ability to do the fight. And maybe it's just like a lot of our bosses aren't great Slayer XP. I'm not saying this needs to be like this, but like if it was respectable Slayer XP an hour, and I don't know, had at least a couple of uniques to aim for and a cool pet. I don't know. I still think there's value there.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason like I still like fondly remember Old School RuneScape, and I don't think this is just nostalgia, is that there's something just chill about the gameplay of I click something and we hit each other till one of us dies.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I even think something. Okay, one of the things, I'll just bring up Grotesque Guardians. Grotesque Guardians is a very intricate fight. It's unique. But man, I just think if you guys had come out with Grotesque Guardians and it was just a giant rock statue where you just go head to head and you just fight it to the death. So there really is a very big incentive to just always kill the Grotesque Guardian boss fight instead of the normal gargoyles. It's just, you go in there, just bash it down, get a bunch of cool loot, have a chance at the pet and the jar, and instead of this, I don't know, some people like Grotesque Guardians. I think there's just a lot going on. It's a lot of like actual brain power you need to use in that fight, a lot of dodging and stuff. I think if it had just been something so unbelievably chill, as was probably warranted with how low of a level it takes to even kill it, I think it would have been really fun to just have a very chill, laid back, just one-on-one against a rock giant thing. But who knows? There's always scope for it in the future. I think just simple fights like that, I don't know. Again, I don't know how the rest of the community feels, but I think me and you are on the same page. Just something just chill, just fight it.
I mean, you need both, right? Like sometimes I want to chill and kill Kraken, and sometimes I want to butterfly Akka or like go back to Chambers of Zarek and cry because I've forgotten how to acid walk and go through the painful steps of relearning it. And there's times where I want to do that, right? Like I think you need to accommodate to both. But like if you think about the players getting into our game and what is combat in our game, and Scurrius is trying to teach people that, okay, there's this timing of like when you activate prayers and there's things that you need to dodge. And I can kind of see Grotesque Guardians as like an earlier version of that. That's like,
true.
Okay, like here's some mechanics, learn mechanics. But it's like, I think you kind of need to have both, But it's also like, how do you know until you do it? But I think that's just whatever players will learn through word of mouth,
Yeah. You're right. You need both. And we have kind of transitioned as a game where people almost expect intricate mechanics to things. So, okay.
I had an idea for a while that I'm like, I don't know if players would hate me or not for these kind of ideas, but it's like, because like players like completing things.
Yeah.
They liked, I don't need to do an Abyssal Demon task anymore because I finished Abyssal Sire, that kind of stuff, right? But like, I wonder if you could genuinely just make variants of different bosses. Like instead of the Abyssal Sire, it's the Abyssal Matron, that's a different thing over here. Instead of like, I don't know, the Thermonuclear Smoke Devil, it's the Cryonuclear Smoke Devil, or just some variant that like, you could spin these up super cheap, but it's like you've then got the option of which boss you kill on your task, and then maybe have slightly different experiences.
Oh, yeah. So similar to like the Wildy bosses, there's like the single and the multi. I mean, obviously wouldn't actually, you know what? I wouldn't be opposed to some sort of multi-Slayer boss as well, but that's besides the point. But yeah, that would be kind of cool to just have like the baby version, sort of.
I just meant like more like here's a different experience on the same task, right? Because we kind of just said like here's a creature, here's its Slayer boss, and that's it, right? But
Mhm.
like why does there need to only be one bigger, badder hellhound? Do you know what I mean?
It's
There
true.
could be several creatures that are all bigger, badder hellhounds that require a task. I don't know. I'm just maybe it goes against players' completionism, right? Where it's like Husky sort of idea, and now I need to go unblock hellhounds
Yeah.
and farm. Like yeah, but
Yeah.
like I don't know.
Yeah. That would be cool though. One of the things I wanted to bring up way back when we just had mentioned Elden Ring was, and I'm not exactly sure how the Hoykotl fight is going to play out. I believe there's going to be some instanced version. I remember sharing a few thoughts on one of my rambles about just the importance of respawn timing being very rapid, because what we see with Nex is the more players you have on the fight, the more inefficient it becomes, just exponentially. It feels like just you now have a 20-man Nex, but the time it takes to respawn is the exact same across the board. So you're actually just losing tons and tons of time just waiting around, waiting for a thing to respawn. So it's not really where I'm trying to go with it, but I think one of the cool things, who knows how it's actually going to be designed and executed, but is something in the world. It's just a monster that's wandering around the world, and you're just killing it, and potentially in mass, and just I don't know. That sounds fun, and I think I've had the conversation a couple times of a wandering sort of soul Herodit that just isn't part of the world. It kind of feels more Elden Ring-y, where you're just part of this big field that you wander into, and maybe there's some little outposts and stuff. But then there's just this wandering giant that will just start aggroing you just if you get close enough to it. But it's multi. You can go in there freely. You can solo it if you want, but it's got that kind of area of effect attacks where you really can just jump in there at any point and just start killing it. And then however much damage you did is what your drop's going to be. But just more wandering fights. And I even was thinking how cool it would be to have a new place introduced to the game, a new location where it's like this village that's kind of being destroyed by a dragon, and this dragon just wanders around the village, and it'll breathe fire everywhere, and the only way to dodge it is to run into one of like the collapsing buildings, and then as soon as it's done breathing fire, you run back out, and it's just a huge multi-fight where it's just beat it down basically. It's just got a ton of health but very low defense, and then it breathes fire and y'all got to run away, scatter, but it wanders around everywhere, so it's always a more interesting fight. You got to take cover, just something that's more not in just an isolated place where it's easy to just be like, okay, now there's no safe spots here because we have a square arena and it's a solo encounter. Like I think being able to manipulate a boss that's wandering around the game just sounds so much fun, and I wish there was more of that.
Yeah, I get the idea, like especially after having played Elden Ring, and just the idea that creatures are part of their environments and they wander around. And it's just part of the world that you'll just stumble upon something. Um, I mean, probably not the first thing my brain should have jumped to. I'm sure someone will criticize it, but like it feels like something Iron players could never participate in. Period, right? Because I think
I
you've kind of got the Revenant Maledictus or whatever it's called has that problem.
I, I think
It's not real.
well with
Yeah.
multi-wildy bosses, Iron players are allowed to get loot from it, just their little loot shares from it. I think that's really cool, actually. And I think a lot of Iron players actually enjoy the fact that they can multi-boss like that.
They can kill they can kill the multi-wildy bosses, is that right?
Yeah,
The
with like 9 other players
Venenatus and stuff.
yeah, yep. And
Yeah.
get loot.
I mean that's a whole separate topic of conversation, right? Is like when can Iron Man group and when should they be allowed to group and all that stuff? Because you can argue that like that's really bad because it technically requires next to no like say like it requires bare minimum gear and you only need to get 10% contribution, and if you do you get the drop or you get some portion of the drop, but that Iron player could never have ever soloed that boss or its younger version either. You could argue like that player's not at that progression point to be doing that content, but now they can because as a collective total they can take it down, right?
That's true.
I don't want to derail the conversation from the original point though, right? But it's like I do love the idea of roaming bosses if we can find a design to make it work. I think it definitely becomes really difficult when you put like it's got uniques and a collection log and a pet and like the community tends to find ways to warp what something was designed to be into something that is just like completely different. And then it's not even just like, oh, players, you ruin the game. It's like, well, no, that's just what it is now, right?
Yeah.
I think players will all. It's something like a game designer can't blame players for taking abusive for like sort of like doing abusable methods to ruin their gaming experience, right? You should almost expect it if there's a benefit to it. So it's something you kind of need to try and think about beforehand. So I don't know, I think like in Elden Ring it works very well because it is for the most part a solo game, right? I mean, I know there's invasions and stuff, but so you can kind of just let this thing stumble around. I'd be really curious to see, like, maybe a member of the community can design something that kind of works as a roaming boss that works for, you know, multiple player types and has like drop systems that work and a clear reason why it should be included. But I'm not inherently opposed to the idea. I think like it's very natural, though, I think whenever anyone pitches anything, period, to start like, instead of saying how awesome this is, to start poking holes in like the one or two things that you see, right? So I don't want to try and do that because I think that's very antithetical to creating cool ideas.
It is helpful though, because it just, I mean, it sucks, but it does help to just kind of, I don't know, show what the actual like problems are with it, because I get that all the time and I ask for it on my rambles. I'll come out with random ideas about stuff and then I'll instantly get one comment that just completely destroys it. I'm like, great, like now I don't need to think about this anymore because it's just a total fail. So
I feel like I've said this before. I don't know if it was on the last time I was with you. I don't know if it was on a different podcast or something. But have you heard of Ben Brode?
No.
So he worked at Blizzard. He was sort of like the lead for Hearthstone. And I think regardless of like, you know, people looking at how he did his job and stuff, he was like a really cool character, I guess, at least, where there's a personality that I was like I guess, like, I don't know, I quite enjoyed like listening to him talk, and he was quite passionate about game design and stuff. And I stumbled across one of his blogs that he was writing, and he's been asked that question quite a few times of how do I get into game design? And this is actually a pet peeve of mine when it comes to sailing, a tangent I'll get back to in a second. But like what he always said is he's always asked how to get into game design, and someone will turn around and say, and his response is like, don't be that person who shuts down every idea in the room, because that's not what he wants out of his team. You know, it's like you could have a like a low fantasy game, and someone says, okay, what if there's a T-Rex? It's like, well, that doesn't fit our low fantasy. And then take it further, and it's like, okay, well, what if this T-Rex is surfing? What if it's actually not? Sorry, it's not a skateboard. It's not actually a skateboard. It's surfing. Now it's got lasers and all these ideas, and you start making it even more ridiculous and ridiculous. Like, well, this is a stupid idea. It's not going to get into our game, right? It's a low fantasy game. But the point isn't whether you actually think it can get into the game. It's just to run with the creative thread for just fun, first of all, and team bonding, and that can be good. But sometimes some of the best ideas can come from a really stupid start point, where maybe you start to then go, well, actually, what if we went to space and this T-Rex flew space? And then you start thinking about just the idea of other worlds and other planets that exist. And maybe that's a cool narrative thread point that could still exist in your low fantasy world, like the idea of other spaces that exist outside the world. And then you might start talking about, well, what if they put influence on the world, or what if there was an event where it was connected very temporarily and created this really cool. So suddenly, like, you moved from something that was like sounding really stupid about like a skateboarding T-Rex in your world, and moved into something that could just actually just be a really cool idea. And the reason I mentioned why I hate it when people, why it's related to sailing, is I think one of the arguments I've seen a lot is like, well, it's a meme. It's a meme skill. It started off as a meme. And I'm like, sure, like, I get it, right? Like, it started off as an April Fool's, but like, I don't see any logical reason why something starting off as an April Fool's couldn't be turned into a good idea, because that's something, at least on that project, we tried to say, okay, well, that was just the idea, like boats in Old School. How could we actually do boats in Old School and create this as like an actual sailing skill? I think the fact it started off as an April Fool's means nothing, because like our design is nothing like it apart from the fact it's boats in Old School. So I guess that's like, we started off obviously talking about the creative process and how shutting down ideas and stuff. But I think that's something I'm actually quite passionate about, I guess, in general, is just like the creative space is a really difficult thing, but it's a really super fun thing to explore. I think the more creative you are, the more you take chances, the more you really try and push yourself to push the boundaries for some things. I think that's just like what being in the creative spaces is all about, and what I love about it so much. So yeah, I don't know, quite a bit of a tangent there, but
No, I love
hopefully like
it.
it kind of makes a cohesive point of like, doesn't matter where an idea starts from, idea could be good, and don't shut down creativity. Don't be that person, that negative Nancy in the room who's just cross arm. Well, it doesn't work. It's a stupid idea. Because run with it. Maybe something cool will happen. Maybe you're right, but it actually maybe doesn't matter that you're right, because just creating can be fun anyway.
You're right. Yeah, running with creative ideas is so important, and I can only imagine as a developer of a game too, just getting that space where you feel comfortable sharing wacky ideas.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think that's the difficult thing sometimes is players expect like the most polished gem, the most fleshed out, amazing,
yeah,
well thought idea. And sometimes like that's just what it is, right? We just put ideas out to the community. That's what game jams are to an extent, right? Where it's just like, what if? And you just run with it. And
yeah.
it's okay to fail. It's okay if something is just a bad idea and it doesn't get into the game, right? Um yeah. I don't know. How's the skilling going?
It's going good. I'm just cutting some rubies.
Nice. I'm about 400k worth of cooking miscellaneous fish because I figured why not.
Nice. It's the perfect time to do it because it just flies by. You don't even notice you're doing anything.
Yeah, I feel like I should be more efficient because I've been cooking some karambans for the last stretch. I could one tick them, but I'm like, it's cooking. I don't get chance to AFK everything, you know.
Yeah, I will never one tick cook karambans anymore. It's just, yeah, like you said, cooking is meant to be chill. You can't do that to yourself. There's too many other activities to focus on that's more high intensity.
I will in a league because I'm that person who doesn't pick the production relics,
Okay.
and I'm just like I'm a sweaty individual in a league. But nah, like on my own iron, I'm just gonna take it chill.
Let's actually touch on that. Ditter Bitter on the Twitter thread asks, when's the next leagues?
I mean, I obviously can't say when, right?
Yeah.
I can't even say if because like that's something where I mean we only plan so far into the future, but like I don't know. Leagues are very popular. I think like you have to say a new league will come out at some point in the future. I've been in some design discussions. I think a lot of it has come down to like we obviously did a rerun for the last one, and it's kind of like what new ideas could we come up with? Do we like the area system or not? Like, is it something that like I guess like I'm just trying to figure out like what do we do to keep it the same, because it was something I kind of realized back when we did Trailblazer the first time around, because we started off locking you to Zaya or well to Krend, right? And then we said, hey, you can customize your own area lock. And I remember at the time saying to the dev team like way back, I was like, well, you've kind of blown it as far as any other area locked leagues. Like we could have done like a Mauritania lock. We could have done like we could have had like a lot of ideas out of that like one thing, right? You kind of blow it all as soon as you do this, but I still think obviously Trailblazer was awesome. The rerun was awesome. So we've been really trying to break things down and figure out like what parts of a league do people like, what things can we still push for creativity, because I don't think we can just do like a Trailblazer rerun every single time, as much as I'm sure a bunch would just enjoy getting the chance to play it, right?
Mm-hmm. I just have to say, so I'm not really a leagues player. I've tried it a couple times. I'm just one of those players that just gets hyper obsessed with endless progression, and as soon as it's like the demons come out in my mind as soon as I'm a few hours in. I'm like, oh yeah, all of this is going to be deleted in a little bit. It's hard for me to continue. But I know a lot of players are obsessed with it, and for good reason. It's super well. I mean, there's always a few bugs that has to go without saying. Like, this is just such a massive project. Sometimes it's actually unbelievable how much is going on in a league, the balancing behind it all, the just sheer amount of tasks and the relics, and just everything is working very nicely together. I'm very impressed with how generally polished it all is and ends up being. And I know a lot of players just absolutely love the idea of just choosing their own path in a way, and I think it's great. So I'll give credit where it's due there. And it is interesting, though, because I wonder sometimes about a next league. What creative ideas do you guys really have? I mean, there's so much that it can go down. Like, there's so many ways you can make a league. But again, like you said, the players, it seems like a lot of them just want the same kind of style. The Ironman part of it, the area restriction part of it, and making something entirely different than that just to push that creative process even further with a league just sounds kind of risky at this point.
Yeah, I think you're right in that there's just like players who like this. I mean, I think you'll find the same like players who love Deadman mode will say the same about Deadman, right? As I will say about leagues here. And to me, I just think nothing hits the same as like the first week of a fresh league. Like it is, oh, it's just so insane. Like I just can't even describe. It's just like the strategizing, the like falling asleep at rank 50 in the league, waking up at rank 2000. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
like it's just like theory crafting. I mean, the hype was there this time for this time round. Like,
Yeah.
Mod Hootie did a phenomenal job with all the teasers, and the community discussion around it was phenomenal. Yeah, like I wouldn't say we're out of tricks as far as like creative ideas. I've seen some stuff floated around. I've seen stuff I'm excited for. But I'm also not scared for us to experiment a little bit, like maybe in the same vein as like Shattered Relics. I think that like it's something where I think after like the dust is settled, I think it's something where it wasn't as popular of a relic system as we had previously, but that doesn't mean we can't explore with other things, because there was definitely a lot of pros to it, with a lot more of the customization and build options that you just had access to try and play around with. I think was fun. I think players settled a bit more on liking some of the more permanent, stronger things, and especially not having to deal with the Shattered Relics interface. But maybe that's more of an interface problem. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's definitely excited for stuff. I mean, I don't know how many players know, but I am such a league fiend. It's like actually insane. Like round about the time that Trailblazer the first time it launched, that was probably about roughly my quit moment on my Iron. Like I say, I've got a Scythe and a T-Bow, but like I'm still sitting here in Bandos. I've got no U purples from TOA yet. I've done no necks. I have still like I think like what's the oldest quest I've still got in my book? Like I haven't done DT2 at all. Haven't done Muspa. There's just so many things that I still need to get back to and do, which is exciting, right? Because when I come back, I'll have a lot of content to do. I was at that point where it was basically just Nightmare, get Justy, get an Ancestral Hat, which was like so whatever at the time, you know? It was just these kind of grinds. I was like, yeah, I don't feel motivated to do it. I'll come back later. And I haven't quite done that, but leagues have just been, I don't know, I've enjoyed them so much. I don't know how it's definitely not official, so I don't know how accurate it is, but there's one of the top ranked players compiled a spreadsheet where like they just sort of like gone about contacting people and said, what were your league point totals for all of the leagues, because obviously the high scores get wiped. And I'm currently ranked like 16th on that across every player that's been contacted for like total league, like if you totaled up all the league points across all the leagues.
Jesus.
Like I went hard. Like I finished rank 76, I think, in the last league, or 74, around about there. Like I almost point capped. Almost. Like I think if I had like a week, I would have point capped, which is obviously a long time in a league.
Yeah.
But like I finished. Actually, I finished rank 73. Apparently, nice.
Nice. Yeah.
But like yeah. I went so hard. I booked time off for the first week. I remember for the last like few days, I basically said to Kieran something like, I'm going to book these off because I think like I'm just going to want to feel itching to play this league so much that like I'm not going to focus on my work, and I've got the holidays and it doesn't really affect our current work going on right now. And he's like, yeah, sure. So I just spent the last like 72 hours going hard at the end to try and secure top 100. My wife was fed up with me like every single, it was like I'd finish work, right? Yeah. And then I'd be playing the league till like 2 a.m. almost, right? It was just ridiculous. So I put so many hours into the last one.
That's like
Actually, is
refreshing to hear as a developer that you can pull that off. I've talked to other devs and it's like, yeah, you kind of just you end up working on the game and then the game's not as fun anymore because you just kind of know the behind the scenes and you're just thinking about it all day. But that's fun to hear that you're still just absolutely get obsessed with it.
I'll tell you, this is like gonna be one of my most memorable RuneScape moments, right? Ever. So this was the evening on the last day of the league, right?
Of just this past league, right?
Of the past league,
Okay.
right? And to paint the picture, right? Like, I'm probably sitting around rank 100-ish, right? So it's give or take, like, who's all hoarding points, you know? Am I actually going to make it into top 100? And I really wanted to do it. And at the start of that day, I said to myself, I had a bunch of goals I wanted to complete. And one of them was finishing the combat achievements for the Inferno, which was, like, that was a task itself, a big 400 point task. Get all of the combat achievements done. Now, I'm not sure how much you know all of the individual combat achievements, but especially in a league, a bunch of them were, like, relatively free, you know? Especially as someone who picked the range, like, boosting relics. I mean, I think I killed a Zuck. Most of my Zucks were killed with no sets, because I just had that much DPS with a 2-tick T-bow. Like, This wasn't hard. But there are a couple of CAs in there that are kind of bad if you pick the ranged relic, right? Because, like, I think the biggest one for me, that was my final one, was I eventually did, like, the above 50 hit points, which was really hard because I didn't have the Banker's Note, which, like, most people took Banker's Note and, you know, angler fished up to above 120 for every wave.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, I feel okay at the Inferno, but not enough. Like 50 hit points is still not a lot to work with, right? Yeah. So I was, like, trying that. I didn't pick Berserker, which basically made you max hit everything guaranteed. I had the Guardian, which is a lot more passive damage, which wasn't very good. So I ended up in this position where at the start of that day, I was on my 14th kill count, which there was another master task for 15 KC. And it was never a question of whether I would get my 15th KC, because I could just pull out my T-bow at any time, and it was like a 40-minute, 35-minute run, whatever. It was, like, super quick, right? But I really wanted to get the CA for the melee task. And this was me in the most scuffed setup possible. It was like Dragon Chain Body, Third Age Legs, because I had those, like a Dragon Fire Shield, a Fury Amulet, an Osmondton's Fang, and a Serp Helm, right? Like, this is the setup for a melee Inferno for me, right? And I'm going in, and my DPS is pants. Like I didn't even... There was another relic, I can't remember what it was, but, like, I had, like, the Lifesteal relic, which is doing nothing with my off-styles, right? Like, It's like... It's like, sure, it's nice if I can keep the tempo up, but I'm genuinely running out of supplies because I don't have infinite supplies, because I don't have Banker's Note. My Guardian relic is, like, doing nothing, and I had 3 attempts at the start of the day, and I planked, and I was just so tilted because, like, one of them was a death getting meleeed to a Jad that I was halberding, right? Like, it was, like, that level of just, like, I'm done. So I put the game down, took an hour's break, and I was like, no, I actually need to go get some stuff done. So I finished off a few more skills, and I came back, and it was like 10 o'clock that night, right? And I'm going to send this a few more attempts. I had 3 attempts in, and I failed. And on my 4th attempt, and this was like, right, bearing in mind, like I said, I was coming back to work the next day, right? Because that was the day the league ends at like 11 o'clock in the morning. I don't need a full day off work, right, for a league ending at 11 o'clock in the morning. So I'm like, okay, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to send one more attempt. And if it fails, I'll just go back to back and do it with ranged and whatever, right? So I get there, I get through it all. It was fairly clean, and it, you know, I eventually just melee all the Jads, and I actually get to Zuck for the first time. Now, obviously, this is the point where it should be free as fuck, right? Like, I can equip my Twisted Bow at this point. I've literally got my Missouri in my bags. I didn't. Like, supplies didn't matter. Like I say, I had the Soul Stealer. I had, like, basically infinite prayer and infinite hit points as long as I could do damage, and now I was okay to do damage. I'm not kidding. Like, as soon as the Jad set spawned, like, in the Zuck, my hands were shaking. Like, I had so much adrenaline. Like, I've done Infernal Capes before. I remember going to change from Mage to Range Prayer, and I saw my mouse going from left side of the prayer to right side of the prayer, and I clicked it, double clicked it back on again, barely got the prayer in time. Like, I ended up, and then, like, here's the worst part. So I get Jad down, and the healers are up, and I don't care. I'm not going to kill the heal. I'm going to tag them, and I'm going to kill him. I'm just going to move on. I fucking misclick, step out, tank a Zuck hit, and survive. Go on to finish it at 2:00 in the morning. Like, it was like the most adrenaline-filled situation, and it was beautiful, right? Because it comes up 400 points, 15 KC for Zuck, 400 points, all of the combat achievements for Inferno done, and then it was like 200 points or something for hitting a combat achievement milestone of like this was like a big 1,000-point bundle, and I'm just like sitting there at like this was like 2:30 in the morning, knowing I've got work the next day, like shaking. So this was like a proper just nerd moment. It was like, but no, like I love leagues. I love them enough. I love them so much. I'll play the next one if there's one out again. I don't care what it is. I'll book time off. I'll figure it out. But I don't know. You're right.
That is beautiful though. Like the fact that it was actually humble to you, like that's a great moment. And it kind of gives you, you know, you kind of just are like, thank you, Zuck. Like, just thank you. I know you're not like sentient, but thank God you just.
It was so undeserved.
Much emotional trauma. Yeah, because that would have been absolutely dreadful to fail that right at the end.
Especially because like my day, I wasn't even super worried about the melee Inferno, like not overly, right? Because as I got more practice with it, like at 15 KC in the leagues, and I think this is actually quite funny. I've got 1 KC in the main game and like 30 KC in the league, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say like I couldn't do it in the main game. It's just I never went back and tried. But I always had waves were the thing that like if you can do waves, you can do the Inferno. Like Zuck and triples are just not hard. But like I think like if anything, I've got a ton of waves experience from leagues, right? Like I might not be able to kill them so fast. My solves might not be quite the same, but like if you just do the waves enough, you genuinely get the ebb and flow of just the quick problem solving. Mage there, this safe spot now, kill melee. Or, do you know what I mean? Like It's just you just get into like that because that's the thing that makes a big difference in the Inferno, right? If you're sitting there and you're looking at it for 5 seconds and going, right, what's my solve? You're dead.
Yep.
You know. So I think that's the skill, which is probably the most important Inferno skill I've developed in the league. So I feel pretty confident if I went back, I'll probably die in a couple of attempts, but I'd probably get into the swing of it. But yeah, like honestly, like it was just I wasn't worried about it, but it was just the fact that I got meleeed by a Jad because I took a bad diagonal and lost, and it sent me down this spiral of like 8 or 9 attempts. And the whole point, I'm just sitting here thinking I could be doing something else. This is if I don't get this, it's just wasted time. I could have gone for consistent points, you know?
Yep.
It was just it was such a wave of emotions, but like I think that's my problem is when I play games, I like to go hard. Like I said, I was speedrunning in World of Warcraft. Right now I'm playing Hearthstone Battlegrounds and like been studying VODs of like top ranked players, and I've climbed to like almost top 1,000 in Europe on that. Like I don't think I can play games casually. It's just not it's not in me like to just do that.
There's something kind of nice. Like I'm not gonna lie, when players get competitive, like if that's part of your nature to be competitive in gaming, that's when gaming really is just so addicting. I remember feeling that with hardcore Ironman release. I quit my job. It was just a seasonal job and I was going back to school anyway, but I quit like a month early because I was just so addicted to those early ranks. It was so much fun. It was the best gaming experience I ever had. Was just that first ever Ironman experience for myself. Hardcore, one life. Every streamer's doing it. I'd go into Foe's stream. I'd go into, I don't know if you remember Lowlander. He used to stream that, and it just felt like this nice community event. And I was on the forefront. You know, I was like top 50 for a long time, and having that motivation makes gaming so much more fun. Definitely super unhealthy, but it's just so much fun. Like I can't. I kind of miss that in a way. I'm actually starting a hardcore group Ironman with 4 other streamers in the next week. So I'm kind of excited to see how my motivation changes toward this game. I think I've just been a maxed Ironman for way too long in all my grinds. Like the position you were in where it's like, oh, go for an ancestral hat or go for Justy or go for Nightmare. Like that's kind of the position I've been in for years. And I think a reset, a refresh could really bring that degen side to me where I just want to like keep gaming. We'll see how it goes though, because it's definitely a different period now that I'm a little bit older than I was with the hardcore Ironman release.
What happened to the 60k Arachnis goal?
Oh, it was more than that. It was going to be like 500,000. That was okay. So just to just to paint a picture for those that are like, what are you talking about? A lot of people know this, obviously, if they've listened to my podcast and stuff. But I mean, back then, everything that I focused on with the game was I want to get third age. Like, give me third age. And how am I going to do that? I have to go to Nightmare to get a mace to kill Sarachnis. And that's what my plan was. And technically, the mace wasn't the best thing to go for. It was actually a scythe. Scythe would have been a lot better. But this was a different era of the game where scythe wasn't going to be viable long term, because I would have had to do thousands of TOB just to fund the vials of blood, and then I would have had to pay just billions of GP for the blood runes, buying them at shops. And ultimately, what I figured was, okay, a mace on rate would be a lot more viable long term. And again, I knew deep down, and I would talk about it, that this game is ever changing. So something's going to just come out one day that's just better than Sarachnis for elites, because that was the main thing. I needed to grind out all these elite clues. And yeah, what ultimately happened is, I get my mace, get everything, start grinding, and then I realize, like, yeah, there's just much more to the game than this. And then I was also thinking, the more I grind Sarachnis, I'm actually losing time. It's just that thing that you brought up earlier, where the most efficient way to play is just to log out and wait until more things come out. And
But
yeah.
But like your Inquisitor Mace grind was memorable then, right? Because it felt
Oh,
like
yeah.
it was a goal, right? It was a
Yeah.
goal that it felt like it was like it's such like the cop out answer. But like going back to like people, like you said this way earlier, I never quite commented on it. Like, oh, I'll just be happy when I get the drop, right? I'll tell you, like it's not true, and I'm not saying this like just quit the game and don't bother getting the drop, but like it really is just like it's the journey to the goal. It it really is, and it's been like this in every single game I've played. I've never once hit a goal in a game and gone, yeah, now I can have fun. It's always like, oh, what else will I do? Like, is there another goal? Is there another game I can play? And maybe that's just like what you just said, right? It's like when you look at games in a more competitive way, or you want to push yourself, or you're comparing yourself, right? Maybe it is just that. But I've always felt this way, even as a kid, right? It was like I'm gonna save up 10 mil and I'm gonna afford Guffins, and then I'm gonna AFK and I'm gonna get to these stats, and then it's always like the fun part was getting the money for Guffins,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? Like, and then it's, oh, I'm gonna get a Robin Hood hat, and then that's gonna be awesome. Then I'm gonna train my range to 99. Then you stop at like 86 because like you got the goal, you got the Robin, right? Like it's, I don't know, maybe.
No, you're 100% right. It's the same thing with life in general. I mean, just life, you need endless goals. Like, it's just you need the hurdles to go over. That's what makes everything interesting, enjoyable, and worthwhile. And yeah, I mean, that's totally it. You need these endless goals. It's the struggle is what's fun. And it's so backwards in a way. Sometimes you're like, if only I could remove the struggle, I'd finally have fun. And it's like, no, the struggle is the fun. You just don't know it.
Yeah, and it's really difficult, right? Because like I actually have this big like I don't know some other games company who potentially hires me at some point in the future. So we're going to hear me make this take and go, actually, we're not going to hire this guy now because he's an idiot and thinks he's all stupid. But like the amount of times have you seen a game just be so overly hand-holdy, right?
Yeah,
And it's like
yeah.
it's like adventurer. You have explosives in your bag. You should throw the explosives. Well done, adventurer. Did you notice that explosives exploded the statue? And this is how you interact with our game world. And it's like just the and or like, well done, adventurer. Now click on this next dialogue box to learn more. And it's like just this so hand-holdy, like over. And I'm just like the thing. I actually remember, like I watched this so recently, and it resonated with me so much. Do you know who Day 9 is?
No. Maybe I've heard the name, but teach
So
me.
he was like StarCraft Brood War Pro, like when he was in college and stuff, and eventually started making a bunch of StarCraft 2 content. When that boomed, he was like one of the first streamers on Justin TV at the time, and he's like streamer ID number 2 or 3 or something. He's like OG, but like he did a lot of commentating for StarCraft 2, has done a lot of content, but moves a lot into variety gaming, bit of Hearthstone here and there, playing MMOs and well, not actually playing MMOs, playing a lot of card games for the most part recently. But like, he actually recently did a dabble into World of Warcraft, and he was talking about the difference between their retail experience and their classic experience. And obviously, this is a seasoned gamer, right? This is someone who understands how games work, and someone who's very, intelligent and into game design. So I understand that like a tutorial might not be made for him,
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, he's so right when he was like comparing classic World of Warcraft, and he was like, I had nothing to see. I open my map and it's just, here's the area you've explored, and the rest is fog of war, and his curiosity guides him, and the high levels of enemies stop him, right? Where it's just like, the game puts these barriers in front of you. It's a game. It's supposed to be like putting obstacles in front of you, right? And challenge you and go, well, I guess I died in 2 shots to a creature with a skull instead of a level. I guess I should go somewhere else and level up. And then he was playing the retail version and through their tutorial, and he was getting frustrated, and he was like, can you just let me play the game? Can you just play the class? I just want to be a frost mage and freeze things, and I want to cast my cold spells and do all this, but he doesn't get a chance to because everyone's like, here's our big world, and here's why you should care about it. Here's our tutorial. And blah, blah. Like this whole tangent go on a bit. Like there's stuff out there. People want to look it up. Day9's World of Warcraft ramble. And really, I wasn't trying to talk about World of Warcraft in general, but I think the thing that is so different, and maybe this is just me, like as a boomer, as a 32-year-old man now, being like, I remember the old days when video games were hard.
Yep.
But I think there's some element of like, the game needs to pose an obstacle to the player. It needs to present a challenge. It needs to push back and go, actually, like, no, like you're gonna learn to overcome this barrier, or like, tough. Right? And I'm not trying to use this as an excuse for unhealthy drop rates. I'm not trying to use this as an excuse to prevent Easy-Scape, right? It's a very nuanced, difficult thing, and some things probably should be changed and some things probably shouldn't. And people will sit on this line, and the line is different for everyone else, and there's this point where they think it's too far and not. But I think like the thing that I very much want to push back against is like the over trivializing of something, like to the point of like, it just stops becoming a game, right? Yeah. I think players get very passionate and upset when they're on their current grind and it's going really badly, and they're like, this sucks, and it should be changed because of me. And I've seen like a bunch of funny posts and takes on Twitter as well, where it's like, I don't want, I don't want dryness protection. I just want dryness protection for me. It's like actually like not it was a funny take, right? But I think there's a degree of truth in there where it's just like, please, game developer, iron out all of the negative experiences that I could ever have in front of me. Make it only positive. It's a game. It's supposed to be fun. But I think like if you're only looking for only fun, only enjoyment, only no challenge, they're cookie clickers for a reason, right? Yeah. Like, and I don't think that, like, I know that's not what our game is, and we need to toe that line. It's very difficult in game design. Like I say, we've all got different lines, like as developers, as players, and everything. But like, yeah, I don't know. It's something I'm very passionate about. Obviously, as you could tell by this ramble, it's just like,
I totally agree too. I mean, I think the best example is Inferno. Can you imagine you jumped into the Inferno and all of a sudden there's pauses and there's arrows and there's dialogue boxes saying, hey, this monster does this. Did you notice that when this did this, it did this? Like, how does that make you feel? Like, just a bunch of tutorials as you're jumping. No, it's not like that at all. It's, here's Inferno. Have fun. Like, you have no idea what's going on. I mean, you can watch guides, you can watch other people do it, but ultimately you jump in and it is just a shit show at the beginning. I mean, you have no idea what anything's doing. There is no explanation for anything. And that is really the beauty of it. That's so much fun. It's you guys do that so well with so many pieces of content. Chambers of Xeric releases. There is no tutorial. It's just go in, what the hell is going on, figure it out, have fun. Theater of Blood, perfect example again. TOA was a little bit nicer to the player experience because you really can just set the level back so far, and I think ultimately that was a net positive just for people getting into raids, because you do have to understand that not everybody is at that level where they can jump into something, and a lot of people are just scared of content because it is so overwhelming. So I think, there's a balance to be had, but that is where the fun is. That's just, you gotta have you gotta overcome things. I mean, overcoming things is such a big confidence booster. I mean, when people get their Infernal Cape, it revolutionizes how you play for almost everybody. If you really grinded out a cape, it was tough for you, you overcame it, got it. Now you just think you can take on the entire game. And having something like that in the game is so vital and important and healthy.
You know, another piece of content that I think changes your perspective of the game entirely?
What?
Gauntlet.
Yeah.
Like, how many times have you died to the Hunlift because you took a bad diagonal that took you all the way, dragged you across all the tiles, and you took 20, 20, 20, 20 and died because you should have actually clicked like slightly closer to yourself or something, you know? I think like that's like a piece of content that teaches you how movement works. I mean, I would say like I got my Infernal Cape, not really knowing how movement works, barely knowing how to lazy flick, right? And I camped a little bit with an SGS to try and milk supplies, like probably most people did back then, right? But I think there's a lot of things that change, like your perspective on the game as a whole. And it's like, it's not that it's like everything should be hard, right? And it's not everything should be easy. And we've said this multiple times in this cast. It's like there should be like, I want more Krakens. I'm not saying I want things to be always hard, but there is a degree of challenge. And I think like, you know, the Oblivion PVMers of the world are going to look at a TOA 0 and go like, well, this is a pushover. It's a walk in the park. It doesn't put up a challenge. But it does put up a challenge to some people.
Yep.
Like, you'll have people go out there and they've got a dragon scimitar and, you know, they'll maybe be a couple of quests off their quest cape and they'll think, hey, I want to try some TOA. And you could argue, like, maybe they shouldn't have been a part of the target audience for a raid. Maybe raids should be more exclusive. I'm not really sure. Like, I mean, you I guess stated you had the opinion, you thought it was good for the accessibility, but like, yeah, I think that I think those are the challenges that obviously we need to overcome as a design team, is making it clear who your target audience is for any piece of content. Because then you're not trying to say, let's make it really easy and please everyone, right? I mean, I think you could argue that like the Colosseum basically said we're not going to be for casual, right?
Yeah.
And I think that was better because of it, you know?
Yeah. But you're right. I think just the overwhelming thing is you just need a balance of everything, because not every player, some players really do like OSRS for the role playing, you know, they just want to do their farm run and just hang out at the GE. And that's just super important. Okay. I think I probably already like just gave you enough credit on the first cast, I imagine, but the Hallowed Sepulchre is just so well done. It's so beautiful. It's such a great piece of content, and I can't give you enough praise for it. I know it wasn't just you designing it, but that was just so well executed, and it really showcases the potential for skilling activities to really not even feel like skilling. It just feels like you're doing a fun activity, and all of a sudden you've gained hundreds of thousands of agility XP and loot. And you've learned something, which is another thing that you hardly ever see with skilling. It's usually just, oh, this is a grind I have to put in this many hours for. You're learning how to move and have more precise clicks and click with a purpose, and I think that's just so cool. Is there any chance that we're going to see something like Sepulcher 2.0 or anything in the future?
I don't know if I'm being honest. I mean, I could straight up just say there isn't any plans for it currently. I guess it depends what like purpose it fits in the game, right? Like, let's say we come up with another mini game and it is quite literally just like a Sepulcher clone. There's some new traps. There's different rewards, but it's still agility. It's still the same thing. It just has a different thematic. Is that something players would want? Because I mean, that would be fairly straightforward to do. Obviously, we still need to go through reward design and maybe like come up with some new trap ideas and stuff. But it is kind of like, does it lose value because it already exists in the game? I'm not sure. If there's a hard mode of Sepulcher, which is the other way you could go through it, it's like, okay, what purpose does this content have? I think part of me as like a developer is like, Sepulcher gets brought up time and time again as like, well, you did Sepulcher, it's awesome, it's amazing, I love you, I now love agility, and it's an awesome piece of content. I think like part of me like pessimistically is like, God, like, why do they keep bringing up Sepulcher? I need to do more pieces of content that make people go back. Damn, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Like, and it's maybe not that like some of my other pieces of content have been bad. Like, I think like it's just I set a very high bar for myself, and I'm excited to exceed it more so.
Mhm.
And I think like it comes down to like what I said, where it's like I don't just want to copy paste like Sepulcher and it's a safe piece of content everyone loves. Like, not unless it was meaningfully different. Like, maybe you could build on it and create a variation. It serves a slightly different purpose. I'm not sure. I mean, I've definitely seen developers up and down, like all different teams steal from Sepulcher. I'm sure you've seen Sepulcher-like mechanics in
Yep.
various pieces of content, whether it's a quest or TOA or like all sorts, right? Or I've had the amount of times I've had a developer grab me and say, "Hey, so like, walk me through like your Sepulcher code. Like, how did you actually detect this to stop players just running through the obstacle? And what challenges did you have?" And that's always a fun conversation. So yeah, I'm glad players love it. I'm glad it's stood the test of time. I'm glad we finally got instances out for players who prefer that.
Oh yeah. What were your thoughts on that actually? Were you ever like kind of low key against it? I feel like because it didn't come out in a timely manner, it felt like the team was like, "No, we can't give it to them. There's got to be this extra element of randomness." What were your thoughts?
I think my stance on it has evolved over time. I initially had a lot of developer pride on it, where it was like, I guess like, how to put this? I knew the floors were static from when you generated them. Like theoretically, I knew that,
Hmm.
but that wasn't really the experience I had all the time in testing, and mostly due to a weird piece of behavior we have internally, where how to put this? Like instances generally stay open until we need to close. Well, there's like a cleanup thing that comes out afterwards, right? And goes, "Oh, is there no players in this? Clean it up." But that cleanup process happens way more frequently in live worlds and doesn't test worlds. So in a test world, even though I booted up like technically a new world or rebooted my code and did some more code, sometimes I was just going into the same instance that was maybe running a slight variation of the code, but its cycle was set up, right?
Mm.
So as a developer, when I was playtesting it, I was in the position of like it felt quite random, like it was skill based. I walked up to it and I'm like, okay, it looks like it's here in the cycle. I need to wait 2 ticks instead of 4 ticks and move and all this stuff, right? And I think as a developer, I really liked that, and I was quite precious of that for at least the first year or so of the content. I would say, and obviously Sepulcher's been out for what was that 2020? So that's been 4 years now. It's been out, which is crazy.
That is crazy.
Um, so like I was very precious about that at the start. But then you start thinking about, well, actually it's a skilling piece of content, and skilling tends to favor like somewhat amount of consistency and skill. And players quite liked the idea of the consistent setups. And I think as well as the content died out a bit in popularity, that became a bit of the norm. Like I definitely remember having some fun Sepulcher races with friends. Like I was actually on Think stream quite a lot, like racing him through the Sepulcher and like having like a stream of people coming out. That was quite fun. So I quite enjoyed that. Like you could do it with groups and stuff. I never really saw the frustrating side of it as I did my grind
Yeah.
because we were purposely grouping up. But like I definitely get it. Like more and more, it's like there's a skill to the consistency. I mean, I definitely saw it with the world records and stuff. Where initially when people were pushing the limits of Sepulcher, it was like I need to enter on this tick. And I have an alt who already generated it. Do you know what I mean? And the alt
Yeah.
is watching the ticks, and I need to enter at this time to get the best cycle through and spawn on the correct path and all this stuff. Um, my stance on it definitely mellowed a bit over recent years. I'm not gonna. I think like when it's ever since it's been asked about instances in the last like 2-3 years, I would say my stance has kind of been, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Like I've been on that like fence, and like I've been asked by a couple people of the team, and I've put it out to the team as well for like feedback and say, hey, I'm not sure. Here's the pros and cons, right? Which are like, if everyone's in instances, it's kind of like, do we want to be in private instances? Is it part of seeing like other MMO players? Does it add skill to the experience of having to deal with the unknown? But I think one of the things that was kind of like a big tipping point for me to push it maybe a bit more was kind of just the realization that most of the time it wasn't even authentic player experiences that were griefing you. It was like sometimes bots were going through, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And obviously as a developer, it's like, I'm sure someone's gonna say, oh, why don't you just ban the bots, Husky? And it's like, well, because I'm a content developer, right? I don't have access to those tools. I don't have access to like review anything to see if they're botting. I haven't been trained. Like, I don't I think I know like one person in the anti-cheat team personally, and even then I would say it's like acquaintances at best, right? So it feels like as far as like botting, the best thing I can do is just like, generally raise it to the team, like, trust in the team and other people to like do their job. But they really do, right? Like I can't stress that enough. The amount of bots that get cleaned up is insane, but it's obviously always an arms race. Anyway, I'm not trying to turn it into a botting discussion, but I will say that like the whole part, like where I softened a lot more to it and tried pushing it a lot more was like, yeah, it's not real players that you're getting briefed by. And I think like it's just one of those things where when it's been vocal enough for a long time and there's a clear benefit to it and use case and you can get behind the reasoning, I'm kind of just on the side of just listening to the players. Unfortunately, stuff like this really can like, unless I'm going to do the work myself, which means talking to my team on my project and saying, I'm going to not do my project work to instead do this other piece of work, it becomes like something I don't really have control over unless I did it in my spare time. Like, I'm sure if I turned up in my spare time and said, Hallowed Sepulchre instances are done, here, ship it. Like, the company probably go, you shouldn't have done that in your spare time, but like, I guess, like, well, we can raise a ticket to get that in and stuff like that. That's a thing. But yeah, it as a whole, it was just kind of like eventually at some point, like I re-raised it. Like I already talked about quite a bunch of times. The team wasn't sure which way to go, but eventually I re-raised it and said this is something I'd like to push for a bit. Presented a lot of the cases, and got it added to the backlogs of stuff for us to poll. And I think we did poll it, right? Like it's I felt like this sort of thing should have the players say on it, because ultimately it's a massive change to a piece of content. So yeah, that was kind of the story of that. I'm glad the instances are in now. I'm glad players are happy about it. I think like part of me in hindsight wishes I'd added like a random value to start the cycle on, or like a random delay before the cycle starts or something. But I don't know. Maybe that just would have made the content worse,
It is a tough call, I think. I was never pushing for Hallowed Sepulchre instances. I know a lot of my community was like, you need to bring this up in rambles. Like, this is out of control, because people started getting really addicted to that nice flow of anticipation, knowing what's happening, and there is value in that. Most of the time, it's actually nice to have sort of a predetermined thing that's running. It's the same thing with a lot of PVM fights. I've been doing a lot of Duke lately, and it's always scripted, but ultimately it feels good because the more you do it, the more you get it down and you start anticipating everything, and that anticipation in a tick-based game just feels good. And so I'm okay with it. I always remember, though, thinking how cool it would be. One of the problems with it is it can never be fully incentivized, because it's either it's abusable or there's just really no way of incentivizing it properly. But I always wanted some sort of friend mode Sepulcher where you go in as a friend or with friends, potentially 5 or so in your friends chat, or I guess as many as you wanted, really. And you all have the exact same route. So you go in, you all have the same route, and you just race each other, basically. And I thought something like that would be really cool. And now, we already have instances. I just think in the future, when it comes to movement-based minigames, I always brought up that example of, I don't know if you've ever heard it, if you've listened to any of my rants on like a sort of like a Cave of Wonders from that classic Aladdin cartoon, where you go in there, you try to retrieve the lamp, and then as soon as you grab the lamp, the cave starts crumbling in, and you have to escape in time. And the whole idea of the minigame is it's not for XP necessarily. So this is something that is going to be more rewards-based, but it still is skill, movement-based skill. You go down there, the cave starts at a certain time across the game world. Maybe it could only be a couple worlds, similar to like LMS, where it's only running on a few worlds. But it starts at a certain time. Everybody joins in at once, and you just see players drop like flies. And if you mess up once, you're kicked out. You die. And it's just this race to get the XP lamp, and there's urns on the side that you can loot as well. But it's just nonstop, just obstacles you have to face, and you're just seeing this mass of players running in. I imagine most people are going to put on Entity Hider, but if you really wanted to have the full experience, you would just see all these players you're racing, and then you try to get up, and being the first person out maybe could give you a little bit of an extra reward. But it really is this kind of multiplayer race with a bunch of people, because I'm not gonna lie, and I think you probably agree with it. It's probably your hesitancy on releasing a instance to Sepulcher. It really is fun when you see a real player and you're like, okay, who's better at this? Who's gonna navigate this obstacle more efficiently? And it's that I think is missing with the instances. And I think a movement-based minigame that is not focused on the XP but rather the rewards would be really, really cool, because it's so much easier to balance. Not trying to get that perfect XP rate, but it would more just be a Volcano type skilling thing where it's not about the XP.
I definitely get the fun of doing it with friends, and I see we could probably do something like that. I think I might have suggested like a party mode for Sepulcher if there was an easy way to do it. For the frame of reference, when I started, like that was like me a year and a half or a year and a bit to being with the company as a new dev, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the things I could think of now compared to then, I'd like to think I'm better at my job. If not, something's probably gone horrifically wrong. But like we could have considered like lobbies to like set people up and get people on the same path. Maybe a piece of content like Sepulcher could do that, or like as you said, be more loot focused. I do think though, like it's so hard to really get across how difficult balancing the Sepulcher was. Like, I don't even think it's easier if it's loot based. I mean, at least loot based, you could probably be somewhat conservative, but like the biggest balancing problem I had with the Sepulcher, and I'm not sure if you remember, there were balancing iterations for like a month after the Sepulcher,
Yep.
where it was like some of it was fixing mechanics, tweaking things, doing this, and it's like, how the hell do you balance for the consistent 6-minute floor 5 person compared to like the 9-minute person? And by the way, doing floor 5 in 9 minutes, especially like close to launch, like that was pretty good, right? Like you understood the content, especially if you're doing it consistently. But like the amount of tick precision that can go into it and is like insane, right? Because like there's just so many things that trip you up that I actually found it really difficult, because I remember pitching it as like slightly better than rooftops at like RD, and this was actually a contentious point in the HLC because they were like, well, this is a lot more than slightly, and I'm like, yeah, I kind of think it had to be a bit more than slightly because of what I ended up creating was very different from the initial vision.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it just put in it was so much more effort to do that piece of content than I thought, that it just felt like it needed more reward. But then on top of that, like while I was balancing it and going, yeah, like RD's 60, 66, maybe 65, around about there, right?
Yeah. Well, back then it was only 62. Yeah.
Yeah. So like while I was like 60 something for this, Werewolf 70, maybe this being like closer to 80's fine. Mm-hmm. Players were getting 100 plus. Yeah. Right? Like it was like that was just a thing. And you're like, how do you deal with that? And also like part of it's like, what does the community want from it as well? Right? I say it time and time again, it feels like a cop-out answer to be like, what does the community want? But like if they're actively pushing for like this is a great piece of content that deserves to be like really rewarding for XP, then like that kind of makes sense. But you're also like, especially at the time as a new dev, you're very scared to increase XP in anything, right?
Yeah. Because
at the time, I will preface that the community is not like this now, but at the time, the community was very precious about top-end XP rates changing. So, yeah. I mean, obviously, some players still are, but that was like an incredibly difficult thing to balance. I think that was my main point.
Totally. And it was agility, something that had just not been touched really for years. Yeah. So, yeah, it was so, you had to be so cautious with everything. And then, of course, dealing with the skilling community where everything is about XP rates. I mean, it's not about the feeling of anything. And I think Sepulcher was so revolutionary too, because in people's heads, they were just thinking this is going to be whatever the top end XP rate is, it's achievable for everybody, because skilling across the board, generally, already rooftops, everybody can get the top XP rate if they focus a little bit.
I mean, that's something that kind of exists now, right? Like, Hallowed Sepulchre's pretty damn good XP rates all across the board, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
It got increased recently as well. I think we took some of the XP from the higher floors and distributed it a bit more to the lower floors, so at least helped out a bit. But I remember like people have always said like Sepulcher is really only worth doing at 72, and even then I'd wait for 82. But if you were actually like a god at Sepulcher, you should probably have been doing it from 52 onwards. Like I think like I mean, I guess it kind of depends, right? But I think like, especially if you were like comparing it to Seers, and Seers is like what, like 46k maybe, around that 45k. Trying to remember off the top of my head.
With the diary or with, I think it's like
with
50. I think, oh, with diary, I'm pretty sure
56 actually,
yeah, 56.
Yeah, that number's jumping to my head now. As so like obviously like with diary is like a bit higher than 60 requirements, but like I was pushing like close to 55, 60k in Sepulcher, you know, with just 62 agility, no requirements. There's no stat checks either to fail. Like, and I'm fairly certain like if I was getting those XP rates, someone could have pushed like way higher than Seers just doing like floor 2 repeatedly. I know there's like less skill like to do floor 2 efficiently, you know.
Yeah.
Because it's an easier floor, but like yeah, I think like Sepulcher really is like kind of meta at almost all agility levels, or at least it was on launch. But players just weren't good enough at it then.
Yeah.
Also, something that I did change about Sepulcher. Sorry,
No, you're good. You're good.
Something I did actually had as a design philosophy early on for Sepulcher. I'm not sure how many people remember this, but it used to give you less XP the longer you took. By like actually like your XP drop was smaller.
Yeah, I remember that.
And what that meant, and I changed this week 1 because it was just so stupid. I don't know why I thought this was a good idea. It just double punishes players, right? You're already getting less XP by doing the floor slower. Why do you need to also get a smaller XP drop because you did it even slower, you know? It just felt really bad.
Yeah, no, and you know what? Just because you brought that up, because that was something that was definitely a good change. We see that this is obviously a different topic entirely.
I think I know what you're going to bring up.
You do, probably.
I listened to your rambles.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I appreciate that. And I think it was first mentioned with Ron Plays Games when I had him on the cast, but he's just saying, why are we losing 40% of our points in chambers? It's like, why when you die, you're already slowing down the raid and losing points effectively by being bad at the raid. But now on top of this, you get the double punishment of here's all your points being gone, 40% of them, and you die twice. So what ends up happening is the people that are trying to learn this piece of content are just getting overly punished. I mean, just obnoxiously punished because they're already doing 2-hour raids trying to figure out what the hell they're doing. And then they end up with 1,000 points at the end. And it's like, okay, you were getting an effective rate of 500 raids points, that an hour. And I just think, if we're really trying to incentivize this kind of, bringing on learners, because there's like no incentive to start bringing on random people on any raids teams for the most part, because you just don't want people dying. It's going to lose your effective purple chance. And I think, honestly, I've come to the sentiment that, we really shouldn't lose raids points on raids deaths. Actually, I think I've actually gotten to that point where you're already slowing down the raid. Now, maybe Theater of Blood's a little bit different. The way Theater of Blood scales is a little bit different. But even with something like TOA, I think you losing team members just makes the raid way more challenging in general. And you're already being punished by the guy just planking. The point loss, in my opinion, and it's the most egregious with Chambers, is just stupid. That's how I see it now. And I think Ron Plays Games just made a brilliant point of like, if that wasn't the case, it would feel much better bringing on some noobs onto your team and just having a much better experience. It's going to be a slower raid, but ultimately you're going to walk out with the same amount of points as long as you complete it. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, because I know you posed this question to Kieran as well, right? When you had him on. And I can't quite exactly remember his answer. So I'll preface this with, if I have a different opinion to him, that's just a dev team, by the way, right? We all have different opinions on things, right? I think that's sometimes funny when, like, I always worry when I come on to these and players go, "Oh, Husky said this, so Jagex hates all of it." It's like, no, like, it's not Jagex, it's not the old school team. It's just like, I'm one guy with an opinion who is lucky enough to work on the team, right? Like, and guess what? Like, there's a lot of other opinions. I get it, right? Like, I've been trying to learn TOA a lot of late, and I'm gonna be honest, like, it's pretty dire without a fang. That's a whole separate point.
Yeah.
Like, I felt I was doing 700s in the league, by the way, because accuracy wasn't a problem, and I'm like barely doing 250s because like I just feel like I'm hitting a brick wall with accuracy.
Yep.
But all that aside, right? Like, I'm trying to learn stuff, right? I'm trying to learn what I can push. I'm trying to save supplies sometimes. And every time I die to Baba as the first room, I just want to log out and go again. Like, I just want to leave the raid, go again. I don't know why. It's so illogical, right? The time difference is so different. So I get it, right? Like, I've actually died to Alm, like, phase 2, for example, and just gone, I just want to leave the raid. Like, I don't care. Like, it just... uh...
It's
I
just,
think I think Chambers is too punishing. I actually agree with that. I don't know if it should be 0 point loss because I do get it to an extent. Like, there's an element of like death mattering, right? Because like TOA, for all intents and purposes, is a safe death as long as you don't use your last life. Chambers is a safe death. Obviously, Taba is a different system, and it's like obviously I'm not talking about hardcores either, right? I know hardcores is like TOA isn't safe for.
yeah.
But like for the most part, like you're not really risking anything except your time, and I think it matters somewhat to go like, yeah, I've nailed this. I no longer die. I'm consistent. That's a skill that means something. You kind of still get that a little bit right though, because if you're at max efficiency, you never die. You're obviously just going to be killing the content faster, and therefore that feels good. But I definitely think the point loss, like, it emphasizes that emotional connection. Do you know what I mean? A little bit more.
Yeah.
So I think there's something to that. I do think the point difference at Chambers is like astronomical though. Like, you actually don't lose that many at TOA in the grand scheme of things, and I still feel bad. But Chambers is really punishing. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing it removed, but I'm also aware that's coming from a very emotional standpoint of like getting it, but also like there's economy implications there as well, right?
You're right.
Like, I don't actually know what that impact would be.
I don't think it would impact the, well, again, I'm not an economist, but I don't think that would be the real problem. In fact, I would actually prefer purples to just be more common across the board. I was talking to Kieran about that too. I'm like, I am that person that's just like, just double the purple rate at Chambers, and mainly because I'm looking at the future of the game, and I'm like, getting a twisted bow on an account, like, genuinely, if you're just an average player with pretty decent gear, you're an Ironman. I mean, that item is literally 500 hours. Like, that is just out of control, in my opinion. And it's only going to get worse over time because, like, what are you supposed to do? Just until the end of time, Tebow is just the best. I don't know if that is really the plan for the team, how the team feels, but I imagine when raids 4, 5, 6 comes out, like, the previous raids kind of lose their prestige. I would assume. Who knows how you're going to balance it, but I don't know. That's a separate discussion entirely. I do agree with you though that Chambers needs some sort of punishment. I don't think the point loss is the way. I think the way Chambers is designed is just, you would have to rework it entirely because there really is no punishment for dying besides that point loss. So you would have to flip it to when you die, maybe it would even be something like, how many lives do you want in Chambers? And if you die, if you set it to, I only want 1 life in here, and you've set it at the board, then you get a little bit of a point increase if you do a deathless, and then maybe it would be sort of like TOA where, oh, do you want 10 lives because you're in a newbie thing? Okay, well, you're not going to get that extra point bonus at the end, but you get all these lives, and dying still counts. But and I'm just spitballing at this point, but something that's not reducing your actual points. So every time you complete a raid, and by the way, this is a byproduct if this were to happen, but then when you see somebody's raids KC, for the most part, depending on the raid, because obviously every raid has a different point value depending on the rooms you're doing, but for the most part, you can see somebody's 500 raids KC and be like, okay, he roughly has this many points. It's not like you're asking him, oh, how many times do you die a raid? Like, how many points do you really have? It's more just consistent. You see the KC and you see, okay, you've struggled here and your raid's luck is horrible or whatever.
Yeah, I definitely think Chambers is a very different beast from anything like TOA, just because the group nature of like, I can join the fight mid progress and the boss fight doesn't lose progress.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
TOA is very different because it's like I'm going
Reset.
in as a duo and I die, and I'm leaving my friend, right? Assuming with friend, I'm assuming you're raiding with friends, right? To like finish and carry my work for me. And if he doesn't, we start all over again. And you could almost argue at that point that like, did we need to lose points because the fight reset?
Yeah.
But I think in Chambers it feels very different because the fights never reset. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like so it feels like we need some punishment because like the time loss. Like let's be honest, if you die on final phase, you're losing like ignoring overload boosts and potentially like an uptime and stuff if you don't have that. But you're probably losing like what, like 15 seconds to get into the room, if that.
Yeah, maybe because
Just
you just
like
spawned right there at the tunnel.
yeah. So maybe if the room was shut and it was just like, cool, you failed all many resets, maybe at that point it's like, yeah, like really sucks because you just lost 8 minutes of time, right?
Yeah.
um, I actually almost wonder if TOA could have been like, instead of like a failure like raid wipe mechanic like Tob when you run out of lives, it's just like how many, like a life basically stopped you losing points, if you know what I mean.
Mm.
So you're gambling on how many lives you want to have to protect your points. And if you have no lives for your points, then obviously it's just like, okay, like if you complete this, you'll get a bigger potential. But if you die, you take a penalty maybe. Maybe that system's better. I don't know. It's a very complicated thing though, right? Because anytime you deal with like a loot system like this, I know like economy isn't the strongest argument, but you've got to think that anytime you change a system like this, you've really got to be thinking, how can a player game it, right?
That's true. Yeah.
Um, yeah, difficult conversation. I've never actually been on a raid team. Like the closest I got was for TOA when I made your invocations interface, right? And I joined a little bit of playtesting. So, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's cool though that you guys do experiment with a lot of things. You're always trying to test different systems, and that ultimately is just giving us a lot more feedback on what works, what doesn't. Yeah.
it also makes everything feel unique, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think just having a new system, like, it's not that you should change it for the sake of it, but like, I think Kieran touched on this as well. It's kind of nice that all our raids feel different and that they're not just the same formulaic thing. Like WoW raids definitely feel very formulaic, like extremely formulaic even. You know, maybe every fight contextually is a different experience, but like, but yeah, like you know kind of the layout to expect. I would kind of worry if we got to the point of every raid feeling like a copy paste of the last raid, because that just means that like we're not exciting our players anymore. It goes back to what I said earlier about like making sure that you have diverse content that feels interesting and not being scared to take risks because of this being, oh, technically it wasn't a 10 out of 10, you missed, and it feels a little bad. Like, I mean, obviously we can update content, make it feel better, but like, I love this analogy of like, imagine you're holding this rock. You've picked up this rock off the ground, and for the purpose of the metaphor, this rock is your game, right? And you're just holding it and rolling it around in your hands, and it's got a lot of like interesting bumps and grooves and shiny bits and all this, and you're like, damn, this is something unique here. Now imagine you just start polishing and polishing and polishing and polishing, and eventually you just end up with this perfect sphere. And everyone else who picked up a rock also has a perfect sphere. Your rock isn't special anymore, you know?
Yep. Yep.
So I love that metaphor to just sort of describe like, you never want to just like stop evolving, taking risks. You never want to just like do the same thing over and over again. If you miss and you fail, that's fine. I think our players are also understanding because they're appreciating we're trying to make great content for them by doing it. But like, yeah, I don't know.
No, that's great. I mean, and you're right about the ever polishing thing, like trying to make everything this, you find something that really works and then you try to make that just like a copy paste. That's not the way to go about it. It's not going to be original. It's not going to feel fresh. So interesting. Let's continue. I want to talk actually about your game jam project. I got to say, you've probably heard, because you listened to my rambles, how much I've just been like, in my opinion, the collection log is not a completion log. I know a lot of people see it that way, but ultimately, and so many years have passed at this point, almost 6 years since the collection logs come out. It's a personal thing. It's like a personal achievement, this logbook, and I've always wanted Ironman to be able to use pre-existing items that were pre-logged to be able to be used directly on the collection log because it's proven that they've earned it. And ultimately, irons are at a severe disadvantage when it comes to actually completing the log because they can't just buy imp links for clues, and clues are the gatekeeper of all gatekeepers on that thing. And I'm really glad that you've been working not only on just that pre-existing thing, that's a byproduct of it, but you're also coming out with these new milestones, these cosmetics that are going to, I don't know if it has to pass a poll and everything. It's a game jam project ultimately, so it's just a side thing you're doing. But everything you've presented looks really, really, really cool. So big shout for that.
Thanks. I'm gonna be honest. It was very like it never really started from like let's do some big collection log improvements. I actually just like I tend to get lumped with a lot of interface work on the team, and I think it's partly because a lot of developers don't like it, and I don't mind it. But I get really passionate about interfaces, and more so that just like why are so many of our interfaces like so obtrusive in our game? Like I'm like right now, like we're both like skilling on this call, right? We're both chatting while doing stuff. Like a few times in this call, I was like, "Damn, is it just Ancestral Hat I missed from Chambers?" And I clicked open it, and I stopped cooking. Why? Why can't I just be like cooking an inventory and just browsing the collection log and thinking over my memories, the things I've got, or checking up something? It's so stupid.
Yep.
So a lot of that started off from just like I really did just want to like make it move and like do that because we have the tech. Like Ash is a genius and a wizard who did it for the world map, and there's been some other talented developers who I can't remember their mod names for right now, who like made really expandable stuff. So I'm not the genius who's like coding this stuff necessarily. I'm just stealing other people's stuff and trying to apply it as much as possible. And obviously there's a bit of refactoring there to make, if the interface wasn't designed to be resizable and movable and stuff, I need to do some extra legwork. But it started there, but it was also just like, I'd been reminded by the community. I think it was like Rupert made the initial pitch of like this overview screen of like, how you can see like, I'm this many out of this many for bosses, this many for raids. And I just loved the idea of that overview. So I kind of just responded probably a bit haphazardly to a tweet saying like, yeah, I could do that. And then it came to Game Jam and I was reminded, I kind of promised I could do that. So why don't I just do that while I'm doing this other stuff? So that's kind of where that came from. I think there was a lot of consideration still about like, people have said like this overview interface is an extra click to get to my log. I very much tried to make it sure like everything left click still takes you to the log. This is another thing you need to access through a different way. But yeah, definitely like it was just the small thing on his interface. He had like the different colored books, and I was like, well, I guess I could do ranks, and went down that rabbit hole of what the ranks look like. And yeah.
It's funny you mentioned, I mean, we'll get back to the exact project, but you made me think of, I definitely have OCD when it comes to menus and when it comes to just streamlining things and making things standardized across the game. I think you guys have made really great strides in a lot of areas. I think with the release of mobile, actually, that was when things started looking a lot more, a little bit more like mobilized, which some people weren't a huge fan of. It was kind of, before that, it was just all about PC. But now, when you go to a furnace and you're trying to smelt your bars, you have these big buttons that feel weird for a mouse, but on mobile it's going to feel a lot better. This is just one of my grievances, and I don't know if it'll ever happen. It's so minor as well, but I really wish that the chat box, first of all, there already are a lot of instances where when you teleport with something or you open up a teleport log with a piece of jewelry or whatnot, it'll just be in the actual chat box. It won't actually be an interface that blocks or just obstructs any of your screen real estate. And I wish that was standardized across the board, at least when it comes to teleports. In fact, I would even say with other menus such as furnaces, like when you're crafting jewelry, I think it would be cool to have it all down in the chat box as well. But I guess part of the reason I like it is, and this would even be something for the jewelry box. You go into your POH, and when you go to your jewelry box, it doesn't just obstruct everything on your screen if you're playing fixed, but it's all condensed onto the chat box itself. And I know that would be some menu reworking. And to be completely honest, a jewelry box is probably going to be the most extreme example of, trying to squeeze everything in. But like for some reason in my head, I just really want a system where all the teleports are down in the chat box. It's just some weird OCD thing I have, like, or at least make it all obstructing the screen. I mean, that would be the worst way to go about it. But I think just the difference is like sometimes the teleports are down in the chat box, sometimes they're up on the screen, sometimes they're not. It's just for some reason the standardization I think is I want it so bad. It's never something I bring up because who knows how to design it really nicely and make it look clean, especially with the portal nexus and the jewelry box. Some just extreme examples of how many teleports you can really add to these things. But I think I don't know, it's just something I thought I'd bring up because just I'm with you about like menus feeling good, and I don't know.
I mean, I think this is like I've heard this quote more so from just software development as a whole, where it's like, I have a problem, so I'm going to make a new standard. And now you have another standard amongst a collection of like a dozen standards, right? And that could be a problem sometimes. I think our game is so big and so vast that like centralizing everything would be a pain. I think the biggest thing, by the way, for like moving interfaces and things that don't close when you do actions is, I know it's like hard to talk in code terms if someone's not used to coding, but like if anything needs access to the player beyond just reading information that's stored on the player save, it probably is hard to do that. And I mean things like manipulating that data, like an inventory, for example, like if I need to change the, like it would be very hard to do that because like there's a lot of code that's like make sure that only one thing can like manipulate the player at a time. So you suddenly like multi-thread that and have an interface that's floating and not closing and stuff. It could potentially break a lot of things. But that's why like I did it with the I can't remember if I did it with combat achievements or if I think I never got a chance to, but I was going to do it for combat achievements, but never got the time. But that's another interface that'd be a good example of like something that could just float, right? Like could just like be moved, be resized, etc. Yeah. Because it is just showing your information from your character. I think that's something I've been trying to push a little bit internally. Obviously, I don't have like a massive amount of sway, but I try and remind our developers that like this is a tech we have. As long as you design your interface with the intention of doing it from the start, it's not really a lot of additional work. I know it's something I have a lot more control over with sailing specifically, right? Is like saying, hey, we have this interface. Like, should it be resizable? Should it be movable? Blah, blah. So, yeah, that's something I'm definitely passionate about. But I agree with you as far as like a lot of the clunky stuff. Like I agree with all of your takes about the play around house and all the unnecessary delays, right? Like I just think that should be fixed. But like it's so also just getting the time to do it.
Yeah.
But I'm also being like pushing that a lot with like sailing stuff. I know I didn't say I didn't want to talk about it a bunch, but like it's stuff where like I think if you have to interact with things on your ship moving around and it's like, wait a second, now lock into it, it's just so clunky, right? And it's just something I'm trying to. I don't think we're perfect with that. I think there might be elements of that still in the open tech alpha, but that's stuff I'm trying to like remove or like change in code because we might not be able to do that necessarily from the start when we're just testing if some higher level stuff works, right? Like some bigger picture stuff. But it's something I definitely want to do that polished pass over and really make sure you're only ever delaying the player if it makes sense. And to be honest, most of the time you do a delay for the player is to line them up nicely for an animation, but players are so used to like animations being screwed in our game. I'm sure artists will hate me saying this, that like it's so natural, right? I can be shooting a bow while playing an alking animation, right? Like it's just I feel like as long as the animation is screwed because the player did something, I think that's kind of fine. Like I don't care if like you're not perfectly lined up as you start, like so there's like, for example, an animation where you like grab the ropes of like the rigging of a ship and like you play with the ropes, right, and like refasten them. And theoretically, I want the player to be stood onto that and look like the hands of the players doing that. But if the player did something or tried to interact or spam clicked or something, and as a result they were just slightly off, like maybe just on the edge of the tile and doing it, and they weren't connected, I think that's also fine. I think the player understands what's going on, right?
Not only does the player understand over time, I mean, unless you're a complete noob, but it actually feels good to have not arrived at the tile. Like if your dude, it's just there's something about it. Maybe it's just sheer number of hours I put into this game where it feels good to not even have arrived and things are happening. It's like, oh, like I mean, you have arrived technically, but your animated guy, it just stalls right before. It's the same thing with the jewelry box, or the mounted glory is a great example. You're running there, your dude's 2 tiles away visually, and he's already teleporting. Like, hell yeah, that feels great. Like, there's just something nice about it.
I agree. I think like a distinction, and I'm going to use cooking right now because I'm currently cooking, and I think it's a good example. If I started the cooking animation slightly away from the range and my first fish cooked, I think that's fine. As long as I did actually still complete, and my animations are going to start being on the stove,
Yeah.
right? Like second or third one, I think that's fine. I think it's a problem if your character stays like potentially like a tile or two away from the range the entire time for 28 food and doesn't try. I think that becomes really horrible looking. But I think players are just fine with the first thing just going through and not having an arbitrary delay. Like, I completely agree with you. It's not something that's easy to change overnight. I could probably spend a month going through all places in the code base, right? Yeah.
Now I'm trying to remember what that one thing is where your player just endlessly just gets delayed, and you're just moving like tiny little tidbits, and then all of a sudden you just teleport 8 tiles. I'm trying to think of where is that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
We've tried to remove places where that's happened a lot.
That can get a bit extreme for sure.
Yeah, the biggest abuse case for that is PvP, by the way, right?
Yes.
Where like you suddenly appear next to someone and spec them, and they see you like move super quick. So that's like a problem. But in general, like we have the tech to do animations while moving. I don't need to start a cooking animation while I'm completely lined up facing square the range, as long as I'm moving towards it with the goal of getting there, right? Or as long as I'm not actually doing the interaction 5 tiles away. Like, most players will understand I need, like, I can start it on the tile, I move into the tile. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, but yeah. I agree with you, is the long and short, but like, I think it would be very irresponsible for my time to just say, I'm going to take some time out and go do all of this, maybe in a game jam, but I actually kind of already have my next game jam booked up to like do something I'm very excited about. So, which I can't say.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. I'm always just bringing stuff up because I just like talking about what I feel could be fixed in the game. And it's interesting because I feel like most people just don't care. And that's kind of nice in a way, because at least for the team, they're realizing, oh, this isn't even really that big of a problem. I mean, you might have personal, problems with things just feeling a little bit clunky, but ultimately people are still playing the game, and most people don't even bring up the clunkiness because they're just so used to it. I mean, I just think for me, I see, I don't know, maybe I've just been so hyper-focused on it for years at this point of just cleaning up things. I mean, even just, I don't know if you had listened to when the nice project rebalance of new shortcuts being added to the game. There's just, as soon as you pass that shortcut, for some reason, it needs to finish the animation. You got to stall there for seemingly 2 ticks. And it's like, just why? Like, why can't we just start zooming? Like that would be a perfect place to have an animation delay, is zipping past the shortcut and you're already zipping. In fact, the best place, I think one of the nicest shortcuts that has been added is Waste. That snowy place where the herb patch is. You cross over that rock, you're instantly running to that fence. I think the fence has a little bit of a delay, but just that first rock, as soon as you've clicked it, the very next tick, you can start booking it, and it's nice. So
yeah, I mean, we certainly have some interesting commands actually now in the sailing stream. They weren't created for sailing, but like we noticed they were broken and tried to start fixing them and stuff, where there's kind of like how will I describe this very layman's terms? I'm sure some people will enjoy coding talk, but like, essentially any piece of script is run on a trigger, and for the trigger to react, it's like 2 entities interacting with each other, and that's just, you'll see that across the game, right? Player with scenery. But like, we'll define this stuff as like either a distance interaction or a next to it interaction. So whether you can interact, but like, there's still a minimum range of like 8 tiles, but like, also, if you could think about a shortcut, anytime we do any sort of scripted movement, it can be very hard, because like, you've got to think about all the tiles a player could start in when they get to it, how far away could they be. Like, you see this a lot with a shortcut where like you'll get to like 2 tiles, then you'll do a small 1 tile walk back to like line up everything properly.
Yeah.
It's like, any sort of scripted movement is actually quite difficult to do, I will say. Because of just like, how annoying it is to line up. And anything that's an interaction with scenery is inevitably delayed, right? Like, because the engine will get you there, and then it says, okay, on the next server cycle, run the trigger for that thing, you know?
Interesting.
So I'm not going to get into that too much.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking of, just because you brought that up, the one example that I always think is when you have to go to Tarn's Lair and you're crossing that Berg de Rot fence. No matter where you start, even if you're trying to start on the tile where that trigger's supposed to happen, your dude will still walk up to the fence and then back up 2 tiles again and then jump it. So, like, no matter what you do, you're going to have to just troll, basically. And it's just, I don't know, it's funny how that works.
It's infinitely easier to code that than try and have something fluid from any place. But
that's, yeah.
It's not. It's also not very easy to just say, make this one piece of code you can plug in anywhere that does it for you, because it's kind of very animation dependent, very scenery dependent, very like it's very hard to. We have some tips and tricks, but I remember specifically like with Sepulcher having a lot of problems with that. Where,
yeah,
like,
I bet.
I'm sure you've seen. Actually, there was. This is actually a very weird tangent. There was a problem with Sepulcher where, like, I'm not sure if you know the layout super well, but floor 2 north path, there's a grapple.
Yep.
And what would happen, or used to happen, is if you clicked on the grapple while on the path of the sword, your character would kind of get stopped on the path of the sword. They wouldn't path all the way around as you would expect. They would just kind of go, oh, I'm in range to distance interact with that grapple, and sort of look at it diagonally. And that means you get hit by the sword. So players had to annoyingly path sort of around manually and then click on the grapple later. It's now fixed. You can now just grapple anyway. And I spent like I know the players are going, well, what the fuck? Like, but I genuinely spent like a day on this trying to figure out, like, okay, if they're in this position, run here. If they're in this position, run here. I was trying to map all this out, and then eventually, in just random brainstorming with an artist, I came up with an actually much better solution, which is so very, like, so much easier in hindsight. But, like, essentially the edging of the walkway of the Sepulcher is like a separate, like, thing. It takes up, like, barely like an edge of a tile, right? But all of those things could be configured to essentially block range interactions. So like,
so that's what was affecting it in the first place, was just the fact that you could see over it.
Yes. So like, some fences you can shoot over, some fences you can't in game, right? And they have the ability to either block range interactions. And I have always thought of this until that moment as like, well, it's the range thing. It's like but shooting things is very simple, very like straight, very much the same as like interacting with a grapple. So all I had to do was block range interactions, basically make a second copy of these that I could paint down, like whenever I needed to stop whenever I needed to force move an interaction. And then the engine just does the rest. The engine just goes, okay, well, I don't have a range interaction here, so I'm going to path the player to the point where they do have a range interaction. And that was actually one of those really fun moments of like coding where I just discovered that this thing that I thought existed could be used in a different way. And it might sound really obvious at the time, and maybe it is in hindsight, but like to emphasize that, like, how it's not like, oh my god, this is so smart, Husky's so smart. It's just like I want to emphasize how like finicky coding can be at times. Is that like that wasn't the solution that even Ash was suggesting when I presented him the problem, right? He was suggesting that I map down an invisible NPC, and when you click on the grapple, instead path the player to the NPC that was in the reach, and then use the NPC code to jump to the grapple and do some weird thing. And I think Ash would have made that work. I couldn't piece that together and was trying to piece it together because I'm a worse developer than Ash. But I found a different solution. He went, oh, yeah, that would actually do that. This is coding. Like, anyone who's done software development knows this. There's like 5 or 6 different ways to do something, and it's always cool when you discover a new way to do something. Or even if you knew that would work, you never thought of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah. It's always in hindsight. It's like, oh, well, that was simple, but in the moment, you're trying to think about it. Yeah, that's cool. I do remember that, and I think I'm trying to think, because this might actually still be the case. The grapple on floor 5, once you've gone down the stairs and you've passed that first huge thing of obstacles, and you're going on the grapple, I feel like there are moments, like at least the way I've done a bunch of stuff. I've done like 1,400 at this point, and you have to almost click the grapple either really early on, not really early, but there is this kind of range, and it might just be as soon as you get into that range distance where technically there is no obstruction to the line of sight, and it for some reason just stalls you a tick. Like you kind of stand still for a little bit and your guy registers, okay, what am I trying to do now? And it's like, oh, okay, click the grapple. But if you click it several tiles back, and it might just simply be the line of sight that's allowing you to not stall. But if you do it a few ticks prior, your guy doesn't stall. But there's like this weird middle ground where if you get, within 3 ticks of the grapple and you click it, your guy stalls for a tick. I don't know if that was fixed at all, but it's something you just kind of learn to overcome. But it might be because of that line of sight thing where you now are in line of sight with it. Because I'm talking like as soon as you cross that corner, pretty much, if you click the grapple there, it stalls you for a tick.
It will be because of that, but mostly like the delay you're seeing is the point where scripted movement takes over, right? Like
that makes sense.
Technically, you can't break your character out of that anymore. I don't think it's just cool. Like you're now going to do this interaction, and it's always better. I've always found personally when scripted movement starts as close to the thing as possible because you don't want to force a player. You want to give players a chance to break out of it, right? Click out of it. So that might be fixed now because I remember going through all of the grapples when I discovered this and doing the same thing where I was like blocking range interactions until right up to it. But I don't know, maybe I missed that one. I couldn't say off the top of my head. It was a while ago I fixed it.
It's been a while since I've done Sepulcher too, so I can't fully recall.
Yeah.
But that is so interesting. There are a lot. There's a decent size of my audience that actually does know about coding and stuff. So those coding stories definitely are interesting to them. I'm super ignorant to it all, but yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's like, it's not always related to games. Like, not a lot of my work. Oh, sorry, what's this? Some of my work is very coding based, right? And it's like, my skills as a coder will make me better at my job there at some points, right? But there's also elements of like my job that are nothing to do with coding at all. It's just game design, and that's like, I feel like that's something where a lot of players, for example, could theoretically be like, oh, I know what's good for the game. I could be very good at game design, but then like actually putting it into practice and coding it and thinking about the technical limitations, like another part of that skill set, right?
Yeah.
On the collection log stuff, by the way, because I think we started off over there and never quite answered the questions of the game jam. If you don't mind going back to that.
Let's go back into it. That's what my plan was.
A lot of the other stuff as well, like you mentioned some of the controversy. So I started with obviously the interface stuff, and then I was like, I'm going to make Rupert's interface, and I had to do all this like fun, like the collection log kind of just like counted all of them in like one big massive script that we just dumped all the variables and said add this one and add this one and add this one, like like probably like 1,000 lines long. It's very easy to add to, but like obviously I had to break that into like 5 or 6 scripts, as you can imagine. That's like count bosses, count raids, count clues, count mini games, count other. So I had to like go through all of them and start okay, you're in this section, you're in this section. And that was easy for everything up until the collection log had launched because they were quite ordered already. But like developers over time, because they didn't make a difference to them, why would they need to? Hadn't like necessarily grouped things together well for even their pieces of content,
Mm-hmm.
So I'd have to like go and group things together, and I was counting up and double checking my math and stuff and trying to. So hopefully that's all been done well. But that was definitely a bit of the tedious part of that work. But what that opened up as part of me doing that is something I've been a bit passionate about for a while. I've always wanted to collection log high scores. I don't understand why we couldn't have done it. Like, we always could have, but like, I think it was worried. I think some people internally were worried about the pushing of like, this is like a very optional thing. Why is it a high score? But like, I think like 200 mils are optional, right?
Yep.
Like, there's so many things that are optional. I think players just like to come, like boss KC is optional, right? Like, there are some people who just really enjoy grinding out the highest rankings they can on as many different bosses as possible. So I feel like collection logs already super incentivized because I also did the update that made green logging a thing.
Yeah.
And players just like text go green.
Like green.
So.
Yeah. By the way, is it the same color as the green cash stacks? Is it the exact same shade? Do you know? Like all the green text that we see? Yeah, there's something really nice about that.
So yeah, I made the high scores when I did all those variable changes, and that's obviously like I had an image of that shown, which I think a lot of players are supporting. But then it comes the controversial bit that you mentioned, where like, I don't know if I should say this, but like, fuck it, I'm human, right? I literally did the Ironman Ultimate, like the Ultimate Hardcore can use stuff on the log. because I wanted to, because that's something I want, right?
Yep.
And I think this is something that's funny when I've had people go like, why aren't you spending your game jam this? Do it on something that's more important for the game. And I'm like, it's my fucking game jam. It's my time to be creative and do what I want and pitch in the stuff. Like it's paid time technically, but it's not like it's like, hey, Husky's pushing his agenda because he wants it, right? It's just, hey, here's my time to do it. And I mostly just wanted to be like, okay, let's go down this rabbit hole and let's see what complications there are, right? Because there might be complications I'm not thinking of. It seems really easy to use an item on the log and set the appropriate variable as if it's a boss drop.
Mm-hmm.
But to be honest, the rabbit hole I opened up was that there's a lot of items that, like, if I just did this for every item, period, like every item that exists on a collection log an Ironman can use, it opens up a lot of potential abuse where, so a good example will be like Guardians of the Rift, where you can get a red die by trading in a green die, and that won't tick off your red die log slot. You still need to get that red die from the Rift, you know?
Yep.
But that means that an Ironman can get one die and tick off all three, and a main can't, and it's that disparity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my first step initially was to just straight up say, I actually went back to the archives of the code, grabbed a list of everything that was in the collection log on launch, and made it a white list of only the tradable items, because untradables were covered, at least in the first couple of weeks as things were missed. That was something that Ironman did get, and every account got. I made a white list of only tradable items that existed on the log on like the, what was it, 18th of January or something like that, 2018, whatever the log was launched. It was not just before Chaos. Sorry, 6th of December 2018.
Yeah.
So I did that. I made that list, and then I found a few exceptions. So, like, obviously, there's things like I should probably make it so that if an Ironman has a ZCB now but doesn't have it on the log, it means they got their ACB before that date, and obviously they've upgraded ZCB. So I went through all the lists of items and added all of the transformed versions of it to tick them off. I then went and found out that there were just a few exceptions that should probably not be allowed. Mainly, these are items that can technically be obtained but don't tick it off naturally. So this is, for example, buying an Onyx from the Tazar shop doesn't tick off the collection log slot because the collection log slot represents bosses that drop it.
Mm-hmm.
So there was items like that. There was the Dragon Pick, which technically fixing a broken Dragon Pick doesn't give you the log slot. And there was the mint cake from the
Gnome
Path
restaurant.
of Gluffrey.
Wait. Oh.
Yeah, but like.
Oh, okay. I see.
So Path of Gluffrey gives you a mint cake, which is on a log slot because the Gnome restaurant has it, and it's the same mint cake item.
Interesting.
But it obviously doesn't tick off the log slot because you didn't get it from Gnome delivery,
Yeah.
but Ironman would then be able to tick this off. I went through exhaustively and refined this list with the collection log community, right? The Log Hunters Discord in their VIP channel. They let me in and we were all talking about it. So I'm fairly happy that this is the correct and extensive amount of work to count every exception that we can think of. And it's also future-proofed because it was obviously only items up to the date of the log, right?
It was cool. By the way, I did check out that little Google Doc of just every single exception. I was counting manually like exactly how many slots I would get. I for some reason I thought I would have more. It only ended up being about 23, and at this point it's like 19 because I just got my Ranger boots that were pre-log and some other things. But I love it's cool just seeing all the exceptions that you guys had to go through. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, so that was the bulk part of that work. That was the work where I think I could understand a player going, this is a waste of time, focus on something else. But also, it was my game jam. I thought that this was a fun exercise. Why not? Let's go through all this. But here comes the other part, right? When you combine Ironman using items on the log and the fact that we have official high scores, it becomes like this dilemma, kind of, right? Because Ironman, technically, their hours put in before the log launch count. Right, to an extent. And it's also not fair because a main might have got like a third age plate body. We never know because it's tradable, right?
Yeah.
But an Ironman who has it can tick it off. I understand it, but I think for the most part, collection logging has been out for so long. The time difference is like, if you're high ranks on the collection log after this change, it's not because you're an Ironman who had stuff beforehand. It's because you're a logger, right?
Yes,
like
exactly.
So I think that generally I found that most people are for it, but put my hands in the air and say this, like this is the part where like I'm human, like I did this for like part of this is my own self-interest, right? I am literally the perfect case for a character that benefits the most from this, right? I've played an Ironman since like 6 months after it was launched, or roughly that time span. I'm sitting here with 378 log slots that probably should be closer to 700-800, and I've never wanted to go back and do those grinds, and I feel bad because like there's items in my collection log that will never be ticked off. Now, before anyone's up in arms over this statement, this is where like I need to start and put my professional hat on and say I can't just do this because I want it, right? Like this is something where like I'm not going to push my own agenda into the game because I want it, but I am willing to take a day out of my game jam, and I will make that decision to do a day out of my game jam to do it properly and to see what that would look like. And because I knew I had this bias, which by the way everybody has a bias,
Yep.
like let's not pretend that we're robots here designing for the sake of it, right? I put out a poll on Twitter because I was genuinely curious. Like, if this was something players didn't want, I was never going to push it, right? Because I think that it's a super contentious topic and there's some good points on either side. I was actually quite surprised that the poll was 77.4% yes. I actually expected a lot of Ironman hate. Like, a lot of, like, nah, screw the irons. Like, it doesn't matter. But there was actually a lot of people just going, yeah, that makes sense. Give them their log slots. We don't care. Logs kind of optional anyway, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Just the last, I mean, you already mentioned it, but you're completely right. If it's about the unfair competition, I promise you, the top Ironman loggers maybe have one or two things at this point that were pre-log. And I would argue that the top 5 probably don't even have anything. They probably already reobtained everything they already had pre-log. I mean, it's just, they just went for it because they're top loggers. So maybe in the top 5 there's one guy that got a piece of third age pre-log. Maybe I don't even think that is the case, to be fair, but that would be the one thing. But ultimately, again, mains have such a large advantage when it comes to overall completing the third age log, so it's just not even a thing. And the way I see it is just, this is a personal thing. It's cool to have every single one of your achievements you've done in your log. And yeah, and to honestly shout out the mains that just were very accepting of it, because I was always that one pushing back. You know, people always say, you chose to limit yourself, you little Iron Man, and I'm like always sitting there. And then the one case I had to backfire that onto them was, you chose not to limit yourself, so now you're getting punished. You're not going to be able to use your pre-obtained logs because you chose not to limit yourself, so now we get the advantage. But ultimately, I think it doesn't really matter regardless. I already accepted not ever having this come into the game, but it is cool that there is potential for it to just drop. And I think most people are fully understanding. It's not, like you said, it's been so many years at this point. This is not changing the dynamics of the high scores at all.
It's not. Marnie will still be number 1. You might make an edge case like, okay, is Russi 002 still going to be the top Ironman? Maybe, as in No Savesi, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, overtakes because it's like, 19 items between them. Maybe like there's some very specific high, but like it's such a small impact on the entire thing. And I also think that, just by the way, proper official high scores, actually it'll be quite cool to see if there's been some secret like unofficial loggers, right? Who have just been putting in the hours. I think that could be quite fun. Yeah, I very much doubt Marnie gets trumped, though. I don't think there's a secret person with over 1,500.
It is so
Marnie is such
wild.
A spoon.
1,500 log slots. I just saw that on Reddit. Like, that is insane to me. I mean, he has everything except for third age and some clues and like one other thing. I can't remember the exact list, but like, what the hell?
Missing 3 pieces of gilded is insane. Like, that's it. Like, and then it's like
third age
pieces.
Yeah, unbelievable.
10 unique third age pieces on one account logged.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. The craziest luck. And you're right about the high scores. I'm a huge fan of potential high scores. There were some discussions. People were saying like, oh, maybe it should be weighted or something, like where third age is weighted. I'm like, no, don't do that. Just make it so it's the number. Like, that's all you need. Just, there's the number of collection logs, who's rank 1, and it's very simple. As long as the high scores don't go super buggy mode again, like initially when boss high scores dropped. I think it's across the board really cool. So Okay.
I do think
Yeah. No. Go.
as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just gonna say one last thing on that. Oh God, have I just lost it?
Oh crap! Did I did that to you? I'm
No,
sorry.
no, I think it's me. I'm just tired and late, and I'm just spacing out a little bit.
Was it something on collection log high
Uh,
scores?
yeah, it was. I know. I think I was just gonna make a general point, maybe about like, I think that it's always interesting when like it becomes like super tribalistic in the community, right? Like us against them. You see it with PvPers, you see it with I against Ironman sometimes or pures and all this. I think it's just like it I understand different viewpoints on different topics, but like I think just the extreme parts have always been like quite bad. Like extremism on anything is just always bad. So
You're right.
I don't know. I'm glad to see players got along with this. Oh, I think this was the point I actually stumbled on. I just meant to say is that like I think regardless, I've said internally this should be polled. Like
Yeah.
my unofficial Twitter poll of 77% or like the like if we like I think we put a question in the survey that I recently just like what do you think of this? But like regardless, something this big should be polled, right? So curious to see what players think. I'm not going to cry if it doesn't get in, but hey, I thought it was worth my game jam time, so I did it.
I'll be honest, and again, biased. I would completely agree with you. Everyone has their biases, but this could just slip into the game one day, and I don't think anybody would hardly ever notice. And I just don't think people would really care that much, regardless at this point. But I do respect the polling of it. That's cool. Okay, I need to bring this up. This is something I bring up a lot, but is there anything? What? Let me just get your overall thoughts with blood shards, and that is the main thing at this point. Is just you probably know my stance on this. I mean, we came out with this thing called a blood shard. Originally, it was a very minimal 1% heal average over the course of your melee DPS. You'd get a 1% heal back, and then one update it turned to 6%, so it was 600% increase. And now it's a pretty useful thing to have at a lot of encounters, and it makes grinds feel more comfy and enjoyable. And there's almost places where it almost feels like a necessary thing, like Vardorvis, getting those extra heals, it extends your trips and it feels good. But getting a blood shard is just the most painful thing. It just takes so long sometimes. And when you're a main account, you don't care because you're never going to grind out a blood shard. You're just buying them on the Grand Exchange, and you want them to have a reasonably high price. Ironmen are struggling to get them because they feel like they need them, but then the mains are like, you chose to limit yourself. When I hear that argument, I think, okay, we could still choose to limit ourselves, but the drop rates don't need to be as extreme. There's been other people suggesting why not drop blood shards to Theater of Blood or Hallowed Sepulchre or Forsani's Nightmare, places that are in Mauritania, or just potentially, maybe even Araxer coming out, or even being able to use onyxes on these blood Furies. But what seems to be the case is that everybody loves using Blood Fury at this point, and what is very, very painful is, yes, Iron Men deal with Iron Man chores, but blood shards are is the pinnacle of just obnoxious chores that feel like you kind of need to do at this point. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier in this call, I generally don't resonate as much with the whole like because I do agree with the whole Iron Man limit themselves,
Yeah.
but I also get the negative gameplay, right? Like, who wants to pickpocket 10,000 Vires to get 10 to get what was it 10 blood shards at that point? No, it'd be 20, wouldn't it?
You'd get 4. 10,000
10,000.
pickpockets.
Oh, sorry, 10,004. Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
sorry.
and
This
that
is
and then
far
if
too late at night.
yeah.
My brain is not working.
Then if you go
But
dry, like a lot of people, you just get 0.
yeah.
But yeah. Anyway.
No, I mean, I totally get that, right? Like, pickpocketing isn't the most fun activity. I mean, it's not the biggest sample size, but I recently did I actually spooned my second enhanced seed the other day because I was doing CAs for Gauntlet, but then had to pickpocket like 9 or 10,000 elves to get the shards to corrupt
Yeah.
it, which I did. So that wasn't a fun experience. Similar activity though, so I get it, right? Like, it's not a fun activity to do. I think this is just one of those cases where it's like it's caught in a very complex position because it needs to service the entire game. I think that blood shards, if blood shards are cheap for main accounts, it's a catastrophic problem, right? If healing is just that accessible and that free, I think like that has to maintain a cost. And what that means is, I think unfortunately they need to be harder to maintain. Is there wiggle room there? Maybe. I think it's hard to say like without more dedicated thought, because you obviously like sprung it on me a little bit with this, but it's like, I don't know. It was obviously like 7 mil, I think 8 mil for a while. It's up to 14 mil now. Maybe it could be slightly more common. It's just, yeah. I'm kind of hopeful that the Amulet of Rancor changes that dynamic up a lot, because I think
Me
the
too.
DPS difference from Fury to Torture isn't super significant. And then on top of that, like the defense bonuses of Fury are still pretty solid.
They are, and the prayer
Like,
bonus.
yeah. So I'm hoping that Rancor just sort of goes, yeah, you don't need to heal as much because you do more DPS. Now I'm sure there'll still be edge cases, right, where it's like it's still beneficial to use a Blood Fury. But I never mind it if it's like, I've never minded the design of like, I need to do some hard CAs, like, or I guess Grandmaster CAs, but you know, some difficult CAs,
Yeah.
or I need to do Awaken bosses, and I should probably get a Blood Shard for that. I think for Irons, like that's totally fine, right? I think they're a limited resource in special cases. That's fine. Because the problem, like I said earlier, is that players will put themselves through derogatory training methods or derogatory gameplay activities purely for the sake of efficiency. Like we saw this already with before the Scar Essence mine with Blood Runes, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if it's fun, doesn't matter if it's good. Players will just convert GP to Blood Runes, and they'll do like Revenants and stuff they don't like to get the GP because that's the most efficient thing to do. And this could be a similar case with the Blood Shard, where it doesn't matter that thieving, like I think what I meant to say earlier was 100,000 fires to get like, you know, I thought it was 20 shards, but that would be 40 shards. Like players will, like 40 shards still will run out, and 100,000 fires is obscene.
Yeah.
You know, so it's, I don't know is the honest truth. I think it's just, I think this is the problem. Is it is complicated, and it's not just as simple as make it easy for Ironman, and it's not as simple as like do nothing either. You know.
Yeah.
6% healing's an awful lot to give for very easily. It warps content. Lifesteal in this game warps content.
You're right. I think the time cost could still be. I mean, you know, thieving them, it still takes 8 hours to get 2 of them. If you're normally pickpocketing, not absolutely sweating, but you're still focused. That's a lot of time. And if you go 5x rate, you're working a full work week to get your 2 blood shards of just spam clicking and failing repeatedly. I think fundamentally what needs to change is just how just thieving in general works, how pickpocketing works, how failing. That is an entirely separate conversation that we won't even get into because it's just too much. But it's just not a good gameplay loop to just repeatedly spam click something and fail. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's something actually kind of enjoyable about just spam clicking, laying back. But the sheer amount of failing, just the freezing, you're not able to even interact with your food. And if you eat when you've just failed, which seems like a reasonable time to heal up, you get delayed even further. Just there's so many bad elements to that whole gameplay loop. It just feels so bad. If it was just the time it took, that would be one thing. But it's just the most painful thing to interact with. That is just the problem with it.
Isn't there an inconsistency as well with the way saving from failure works? Is it not something? I feel like sometimes I get delayed and sometimes I don't. I'm trying. I can't remember what the difference was.
Oh, I mean, it might just be the dodgy necklace or the shadow veil. If you're talking about that,
yeah, I
are you
think
talking
it's like
about
one of
eating?
them delays you, one of them doesn't, and it feels weird when it's like you weren't damaged from pickpocketing, but you still have to go through a stun. It feels like I can't remember. There's something. There's a weird interaction there. We could probably clean up, but
Yeah. No,
yeah, I
there's
don't know.
just, and again, I mean, I think chipping away at it slowly, the Varlamore pickpocketing was just great. You know, there's here and there little elements where you just freely auto pickpocket. The way you guys did that, I don't know if you had anything to do with that, but that was amazing to slowly slip in the auto pickpocket, but it's not complete auto. It's just, okay, pay attention. Look where the kid is distracting one of the rich citizens, and you now get to just have a little auto time. I think that's great. I also love the pickpocketing houses. I think if something was implemented across Dark Mayor, where you're actually just going around and you're able to go into houses and loot for 3 minutes straight, and you're just pickpocketing these little chests in people's houses, and you have a chance of a blood shard there, just making it more interactive. I think this is my problem with it all, is just bots. If there were no bots, these things would be sky high in price. I mean, just blood shards are, no main account wants to go thieve these. I mean, eventually at some point they would, because the prices would be so astronomical that they would just make so much money doing it. But I think they're just over, like across the board, too rare. And I just figured I'd bring it up. I'm not expecting to solve this issue by any means, but I just, that seems to be the last chore, like the one chore that seems to be so annoying for Ironman. And if that were to be fixed, most of the chores seem very reasonable for Ironman. Like most of everything else we have going for us, the herb runs we need to keep up on, the potions, everything is pretty fine. But the blood shards is just absolutely out of control.
Yeah, I think in general, it's probably healthy if that activity stays a chore regardless, because I wouldn't want Ironman to just have like, oh, we just do all content with an Amulet of Blood Fury. I think that would be bad, as I said, right? Like I think that would be bad
it still
for any
needs to
account
take time to get
but,
it. It should be inefficient to spend your time going to get blood shards. Yeah,
you can absolutely make the argument that the chore is just slightly, or maybe a bit more than slightly, on the difficult side. Like I say, I wish I had a good answer for you, but hopefully I at least raise some of the concerns on the other side, right? It's just a difficult situation.
You're right.
I will say on the auto pickpocketing stuff, though, I think one of the nicest things about auto pickpocketing, and this was a design philosophy we kind of stumbled upon with Guardians of the Rift, is just having moments of reprieve without losing efficiency feels good in content.
It does.
Like the fact that I can go, cool, I auto pickpocket this for 20 seconds, change my YouTube video, respond to my friend, check what the ping was on Discord from the server, right? And then feel like I can do that without losing efficiency. That was something like Guardians of the Rift did really well with like the mining period at the start of the fight, right? Where you've got like a minute or so of downtime. So I don't know, maybe there's room for some more auto pickpocketing stuff as like, a thing you need to keep an eye out for if you're paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Food for thought. I don't want to promise anything.
Yeah. No, you're right. That was great execution on that, by the way. That Guardians of the Rift, just allowing you to freely mine. There's not, this one ran out, go to the other one now randomly. No, you just decided to send it full on. Just here you go. Here's your couple minutes of free AFK that feels efficient. Great. That was phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right.
Not trying to toot my own horn too much, but yeah. Elena also worked on that, and her ideas are usually phenomenal as well. So I don't know which one of us thought of it.
I really respect what you guys did with Guardians of the Rift. I mean, Elena, I think, was trying to cater to me and a few others about the whole tick manip. I think us not looking at what was happening behind the scenes with you guys designing Guardians of the Rift, she wanted to definitely appeal to that high efficiency mindset where you're gonna potentially bring a knife and log, and in my opinion I would love a gnome cube at this point. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but
I'm in support.
I'm so glad to hear that, by the way. But she and you guys probably all discussed this did not feel good. It did not. There's too rapid of moments where you have to mine just for a brief period of time, that bringing a knife and a log and the inventory space it would take up and all this just wouldn't feel well. And I think the accumulation of essence as well, you're not just getting one at a time, you're filling up your inventory rapidly. I think the design choice was also perfectly executed with just removing all that, and you're just as efficient just AFKing it for a few seconds.
I think variety's the spice of life. Gotta have that. But Elena's very much for tick manipulation in healthy ways. It's something we've even been considering with sailing, and I think it's something where, like, if it makes sense to, and it feels like a traditional gathering loop, like wood cutting or mining, I think tick manipulation could just make sense to do. And I think the best thing we have to control it is efficient players will do it, even if it's like a minor increase. I think tick manipulation sets your action delay to 2 or 3. I can't remember which one. Like your actual like delay mining, it's always 2 or 3 tick.
Mm-hmm.
So like if the baseline is 6, that's like a 2 or 3 times increase. If the baseline is like 4 and it's going to 3, that's like a very minor increase. And I think like that's where you can balance tick manipulation well, where I can't say, for example, I can't remember the exact numbers. It's too tired, and I would have to look it up again. But for the sake of the argument, tick manipulation makes everything 3 tick. If the casual player is doing it in 4, then it doesn't feel like as big of a loss to not tick manipulation. But it gives high level players a chance to flex that skill, especially because, let's face it, like there's definitely a crowd of players that find doing tick manipulate stuff and that rhythm very enjoyable.
Yeah.
And I'm all for that variety in our game, where it makes sense.
Yeah, and I think you guys also probably agree. It's not the click intensity of it all. It's really just the flow and the rhythm you can get yourself into. That's important. Not just how many clicks are you performing in that small window. That's not really the important part at all.
Agree.
Okay, Husky, I am. We're gonna wrap things up here. This was just a phenomenal conversation. I love talking to you. You're just, I think you're a gem when it comes to being in the community, and you've done such amazing work over the years. And I'm really, really happy you're around, and I hope you'll be around for a long time to come, helping this game expand and grow in healthy ways. And it's cool to see. So I appreciate your time today. I guess I'll just ask if there's any shout outs you'd like to give, maybe from your team or just people in the community that you think deserve a little shout out. I'll give you the time now.
Oh, well, shout out to yourself. It's been a pleasure. I think that I wish more players made video form sort of review content. I think I disagree with a lot of your takes. I agree with a lot of your takes, but I think that video ramble content and just talking through blogs, that's the kind of content I crave, especially as a developer. So thank you so much to you. And again, not to monopolize on what you're doing. Hope other players don't steal your thunder, but I wish more players did that. Speaking of which, if you think that I've left some pretty out there takes or you think I'm a massive idiot, leave a comment below to help Sae Bae out, telling people how stupid I am. But yeah, like the team are awesome. Everyone I've worked with on the team is awesome. It feels like a throwaway comment. Of course, he supports his team, but like there's so many incredibly passionate people who just want to do the best for the game and make good content. So just shout out to my team. They're simply amazing. I feel like I get a lot of praise sometimes for things, even things that I'm not even a part of, just because I engage with the community, and I always feel a little bit of imposter syndrome because I'm like, no, these are the people who are awesome. So, yeah, I don't know. Shout out to them.
Lovely. Okay, guys, down in the description, I'll have Husky's Twitter linked below. Is there anything else you'd like linked?
No, I think it is really just Twitter. If you've got questions, I do read a lot of what I get tweeted. I don't have all the hours in the day to respond to everything. But if you tweet me it, I'll probably read it. And unfortunately, if it's about your account being suspended, I cannot help you, which happens probably 50% of the comments I get. So
yeah.
Reach out to Jagex support in that case or raise a ticket. There's literally nothing else I can do. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Once again, for those listening, down in the description, there is a Patreon link and a YouTube membership link if you'd like to support the cast. Also, down below is my Twitter as well. If you'd like to follow me, I keep you guys updated on upcoming guests. And I will just announce the next guest, who will be another J mod who I've had on before, Mod Goblin. He'll be coming on Tuesday to talk, and I'm really, really excited for that as well. So be sure to subscribe if you're on YouTube. And also, all of these podcasts are on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can check them down there in the description as well. But that's it for me. Husky, thank you very much once again.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, guys. We'll catch you in the next one. Peace.